Hey guys, tonight we're headed deep into the flickering candle-lit world of colonial Massachusetts, a place where the wind whistles through leafless trees and everyone seems to be watching everyone else just a little too closely. You're standing on the damp, muddy road of a Puritan settlement called Salem Village. The sky above is low and gray. Crows call out from naked branches. A chill wind snakes around your ankles. And somewhere not too far from here, someone has just whispered the word witch. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments because yes, I'm deeply curious where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the heart of Salem Village in the year 1692. It smells of wet hay and wood smoke. The houses are stark, wooden, all rough edges and tiny windows. Everyone is dressed in grays and browns, heads bowed, voices low. You're not from around here, and that's immediately obvious. These people don't smile at strangers. It's a hard place. Life is carved from frozen soil and religious fear. There's a meeting house, a blacksmith, some scattered farms, and little else. Your boots crunch over brittle frost. It's late winter, the kind where everything feels like it might snap in half, including the people. Salem Village is not yet famous, not yet tragic. That will change. But right now you can almost feel it under your skin. This tension, like everyone is waiting for something to go wrong. And then it does. Inside one of the minister's houses, young girls are beginning to scream. Not playful shrieks, but guttural, stomach-curdling cries. They twist their bodies, convulse, duck under furniture, bark like dogs. Their eyes roll back. Their limbs flail like they're underwater. And they claim invisible hands are pinching, choking and stabbing them. You're in the parsonage of Reverend Samuel Parris. His daughter Betty is just 9. Her cousin Abigail Williams is 11. And they are the epicenter of what will become one of the most infamous chapters in American history. Right now, though, it just looks like a medical emergency. Or something worse. No one knows what's wrong with the girls. The local doctor, William Griggs, is baffled. He can't find any physical cause. So he throws out a diagnosis that will change everything. This is no illness, he says. This is bewitchment. That single word catches like dry brush, because people here already believe that witches are real, not fantasy, not metaphor. Real women, and occasionally men, who fly through the night, sign their names in the devil's book, and hex crops, cows, children. See, these aren't just spooky bedtime stories. The Bible says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." And these Puritans, they take the Bible extremely seriously. To them, witches are not just wrong. They're dangerous. They're traitors to God, and they deserve death. Betty and Abigail are joined by more girls. Ann Putnam Jr. is 12. Mercy Lewis is 17. Mary Walcott, Elizabeth Hubbard. Soon there's a whole group of teenage and preteen girls convulsing, screaming, and naming names. It's a little like Mean Girls meets The Exorcist. And you're right in the middle of it. They say a Caribbean slave named Tituba has bewitched them. Tituba lives in the Parris household. She's different. She tells stories about omens and spirits. She's the first person they accuse. And once she's arrested, the floodgates open. But let's stay here a bit longer, because this moment, this beginning, is strange and messy. Historians still argue whether the girls were faking, traumatized, poisoned, or genuinely ill. One theory suggests ergot poisoning from moldy rye bread could have caused hallucinations. Another says it was mass psychogenic illness, basically psychological stress manifesting physically. Or maybe it was a mix of boredom, repression, and teenage theatrics gone nuclear. Whatever the reason, the girls are believed. Their screams are real enough. And their testimonies, those accusations they whisper, weep, and shriek, will soon send neighbors to the gallows. You pass by the parsonage again, and the curtains twitch. Someone's always watching now. The village has entered a new phase. It's not just harsh, it's hunted. You don't dare look anyone too long in the eye. You don't dare be too strange, too outspoken, or too independent. All of those could be signs you're in league with the devil. And remember this name, Salem. Not just the village, but the nearby Salem town. They're distinct places. Salem Village is rural, poor, isolated. Salem town is more coastal, wealthy, tied to trade. And guess which side has more power exactly? That division will fuel the chaos. Old rivalries, land disputes, and family feuds. All of them will be swept up into the storm about to unfold. Because when the accusations begin, they won't stop at Tituba. They'll jump fences, climb up the social ladder, and drag dozens of people, some quite respected, into courtrooms where survival isn't guaranteed. And you might be next. If someone doesn't like how you looked at them, if your cow dies at the wrong time, if you muttered under your breath when you thought no one could hear, at night you hear dogs barking, people praying, girls wailing, fires crackle behind shutters. You lie awake in your little borrowed bed wondering if you'll still be free in the morning, or alive. By the end of this, 19 people will be hanged. One will be crushed to death. Several others will die in jail. Over 200 will be accused. And it all begins right here, with a handful of girls in a cold house, and a community so afraid of the devil that it stops recognizing its own reflection. You wake up to the echo of distant church bells. The village is already moving, brittle branches snapping under boots, firewood being stacked, livestock fed. But something heavier than frost hangs in the air this morning. The whispers you heard last night have grown louder. People are talking about the devil, and not just in sermons. To understand how this fire starts, you need to trace its kindling. Salem wasn't born in a vacuum. It's the product of generations of fear exported from Europe like wool and iron. For over 200 years before the Salem trials, Europe had already been tangled in its own obsession with witches. You head back in time, just for a moment. Imagine a windswept Scottish moor or a German village lit by torches. Between the 1400s and 1600s, an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 people, mostly women, were executed as witches across Europe. That's not bedtime folklore. That's state policy. Laws like the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, a witch-hunting manual published in 1487, laid it all out. How to find witches, how to torture them, and how to execute them. You squint at that book's leather-bound spine and feel a chill. It reads like a sadistic instruction manual, and it's sold like hotcakes. Europe ate it up. And you know what else Europe exported? That mindset. The Puritans of Salem were the intellectual descendants of those same witch hunters. When they crossed the Atlantic in search of religious freedom, they packed their Bibles, their farming tools, and their burning suspicion that Satan was hiding behind every odd behavior and every crooked glance. In England, King James himself, yes, the Bible guy, wrote a whole book called Demonology, detailing his own witch-hunting philosophy. If royalty can believe this stuff, how is a 17th century cowherder in Massachusetts supposed to resist? So while Salem may look isolated, it's part of a much bigger pattern. Witches were a European export, right up there with tea, plague rats, and powdered wigs. And the Puritans didn't just inherit the fear, they supercharged it. You duck into the Salem Village Meeting House where Reverend Paris preaches with the fury of someone constantly disappointed by how sinful everyone is. You sit stiffly on the wooden bench as he thunders about damnation, eternal fire, and invisible enemies. There's no soft gospel here, no stained glass, no warm candles. Just hard benches, harder doctrines, and the sense that you are never doing enough to avoid hell. Which, let's be honest, is not exactly the most relaxing vibe. The devil is always nearby in these sermons. He lurks in the woods. He speaks through the wind. And if your bread goes moldy or your pig dies, that's probably him too. These aren't metaphors to the congregation. They're daily anxieties. Historians still argue whether the Puritans genuinely believed in a literal devil walking among them, or whether these stories served more political and social purposes. Was Satan a real red-cloaked villain, or a tool used to enforce conformity? You step outside the church, squinting at the low sun. Everyone looks so serious here. But remember, life was brutal. Child mortality was high. War with indigenous tribes was a constant threat. The recent King Philip's War had wiped out entire settlements. People were poor, cold, hungry. And when life feels out of control, blaming the supernatural offers an oddly comforting structure. Plus, here's a weird little fringe fact for you. Some Puritans believed the devil preferred to target women not just because of biblical Eve-type reasoning, but because, as one minister put it, women were weaker vessels. Others got even spicier, suggesting Satan was attracted to women in, let's call it, a problematic way. In other words, 1600s theology wasn't just puritanical, it was deeply gendered and deeply weird. And so, The atmosphere in Salem isn't just spooky, it's primed. Think of it like an old dry barn stuffed with hay. All it needs is a spark. The European witch trials lit the match. Salem Village? That's where it will explode. You wander toward the edge of the village where the forest begins. The trees loom like silent sentinels. The Puritans feared this wilderness. To them it was not a place of peace but chaos. Unsettled, unknown. They believed it was where witches met at night, cavorted with devils, brewed potions, signed their names in infernal books. To us, the woods seemed peaceful. To them, it was practically hell's lobby. And then there's the generational trauma. These aren't easy times. Many of the accusers and accused had lived through or lost family in previous attacks. Many were refugees. Everyone was exhausted, spiritually brittle and simmering with buried grudges, which brings us to a fun little aside, because no Puritan settlement is complete without some petty, tangled family feuds, land disputes, inheritance drama, slights. At church, the Putnams and the Porters were two of the most powerful families in Salem Village, and oh boy, they hated each other. Guess which side the most accusations came from? Exactly. You scratch your head and realize this isn't just religious fear, it's human fear too. Personal, petty, a kind of weaponized gossip. It's tempting to laugh at all this, to brush it off as a bizarre chapter from long ago. But here's the kicker. The mindset that fueled the Salem trials isn't extinct. It just evolves. The labels change, the pitchforks are digital now, but people still look for scapegoats. They still panic, and they still listen to the loudest voice in the room when they're afraid. So as the sun sets behind the trees and the wind picks up, you start to feel it, the same fear that infected an entire village. You understand how it could take root, how it could grow. The girls are still screaming, Tituba is still locked in jail, and now other names are being whispered. People you've seen in the market, people who held your baby, people who prayed beside you. Someone's pointing fingers, and if you're not careful, one of those fingers might be pointing at you. You're standing at the edge of a clearing now, watching as a group of villagers gathers for yet another prayer meeting. Their faces are drawn, tense, searching the skies like they expect a literal fireball to fall from heaven. You're starting to feel it too, that creeping unease that seems to hover over everything like smoke. But to really grasp why this place is about to eat itself alive, you have to look at what's under the surface. The culture, the rules, and the tightly bound expectations of Puritan life. Let's be clear. This isn't just some sleepy farming village. It's a pressure cooker, and the steam has been building for years. You turn your head toward the meeting house. That simple wooden structure is more than just a church. It's the town hall, the courtroom, the soul of the community. And what goes on inside there? Judgment, both spiritual and social. You don't miss Sunday services unless you're dying, or possibly already dead. And even then, someone might still expect you to drag yourself there to be accounted for. Everyone here is a Puritan. That's not just a denomination, it's an identity, a lifestyle, a 24/7 spiritual boot camp. You dress plain, work hard, speak softly, pray constantly, and fear God with the intensity of someone being watched all the time. Because in your mind, you are being watched. All your sins written in invisible ink across your skin. And while that might sound exhausting, it also creates stability, or at least the illusion of it. Everyone knows their place. The hierarchy is clear. Men over women, elders over youth, ministers over laity. No dancing, no gambling, no gossip. Although, let's be honest, gossip still thrives. It's just cloaked in concern. Now look closer. You notice something strange. Despite being a godly community, Salem Village is, well, it's kind of a mess. There's infighting. People can't agree on leadership. Factions squabble over land. And their minister, Reverend Samuel Parris, remember him? He's not exactly the soul-soothing type. He's rigid, divisive, and obsessed with personal authority. His sermons throb with fire and brimstone, but not everyone buys it. You eavesdrop near a row of women exchanging whispers in the chill air. Some are furious about the taxes they have to pay to Paris. Others resent the way he controls the pulpit like a throne. Historians still argue whether his leadership flaws helped stir the trials to life or whether he simply got caught in the crossfire. Either way, he's far from universally beloved. And here's where it gets even stickier. Salem Village isn't even a town yet, politically speaking. It's an offshoot. still partially under the authority of more established Salem town, which is richer, more mercantile, and definitely full of people who look down on their rural neighbors. This creates a kind of colonial inferiority complex. You're not just fighting the devil out here, you're fighting irrelevance. Then there's the gender issue. You glance at the women in the village. They're worn thin from childbirth, housework, and the unrelenting scrutiny of a society that defines them almost entirely by their submission. Most can't read. Many are widowed young. And yet, ironically, women are believed to be more spiritually dangerous, more susceptible to temptation, more likely to fall in with the devil. That's not you projecting, that's official Puritan theology. A quirky little tidbit. Some Puritan ministers taught that even sleeping too soundly could be a sin of sloth. So if you're a woman who overslept and also happened to own a cat, you're basically one twitchy nose away from being accused of witchcraft. And speaking of cats, yes, they were associated with witches, especially black ones. But here's the twist. In Puritan New England, cats weren't the only animals suspected of being familiars. Pigs, birds, even frogs were accused of being demon companions. One woman in Andover was accused because she had a toad that allegedly brought her pins. I mean, not even an Amazon toad, just a regular one. As the wind blows harder through the trees, you wonder what it feels like to live in a place where your neighbor could accuse you of consorting with a demonic squirrel, and people would actually believe them. But remember, it's not just about superstition. Beneath all this religious rigidity is a community stretched to its breaking point. Post-war trauma, economic tension, land disputes, deep rivalries between families, and into that bubbling pot walks a group of young girls, suddenly convulsing, moaning, naming names. It's a recipe for disaster. One more thing to notice, this world runs on testimony. Proof, as we think of it today, doesn't matter nearly as much. They don't have forensics, they don't need a video. If someone says they saw your spirit pinching them, that's often enough. That's the infamous spectral evidence, and it will become the backbone of the trials, but more on that later. For now, you keep your head down and walk slowly past the tavern. Yes, they had those, and back toward the parsonage. Abigail Williams and Betty Paris are still experiencing their fits. They're crying out in voices not their own, twitching, going stiff as boards. The village doctor has seen all this and decided, with zero irony, that it's supernatural. And once someone labels you bewitched, it's like getting tagged in a deadly game of colonial tag. People start avoiding you, then they start fearing you, then they start blaming you. You're starting to understand just how fragile the social fabric is here. It's like a spider web spun in a windstorm. One small movement, one whispered word, and it all begins to tear. You glance over your shoulder. Did someone just look at you strangely? Are they whispering about you? Is that child pointing or just reaching for a stick? You can't tell anymore. You're back at the parsonage where everything is unusually quiet. Too quiet. Abigail Williams and Betty Paris lie still for the first time in days. Their fits have subsided, but no one dares believe it's over. Instead, they stand watching the girls as if expecting them to levitate at any moment. And then someone says, they've been cursed. You can almost hear the collective exhale of relief. It's not a medical mystery. It's not something inside the girls. It's something done to them, and that changes everything. It also opens a very dangerous door. When people feel powerless, they look for something or someone to blame. And in Salem, the list of suspects begins with those already on the margins. You step into the candlelit parlor as the girls begin to whisper names. The first is Tituba. She's an easy target. A slave. Foreign. Mysterious. Her stories of Caribbean magic and spirits had once entertained the children, but now they're evidence. You remember her tales. Colorful, strange, filled with omens and animals. To the girls, it was a harmless thrill. To the adults, it was a red flag waving from hell itself. The second name is Sarah Good. You know her too. She's a disheveled, foul-mouthed beggar who wanders the village muttering to herself and snapping at children. She's poor, unkempt, and always asking for food. If someone refuses, she walks away muttering, probably curses, people think. When the girls name her, it doesn't take much convincing. And the third? Sarah Osborne. She hasn't been to church in ages, which is already suspect. She married her servant, a scandal, and challenged her late husband's will, threatening the property of respectable relatives. That's strike 3 in Puritan bingo. 3 women, all socially outcast, all accused. You watch the village shift. Like a school of fish, everyone moving in unison toward a single conclusion. These women are witches. And just like that, the match is struck. The dry barn of fear bursts into flame. You follow the authorities as they prepare for arrest. They don't storm in with torches. They come with warrants, signed and official. But don't let the paperwork fool you. This is less about justice and more about optics. They need to look like they're doing something. And that something starts with dragging 3 women from their homes to face questioning. You imagine Sarah Good being pulled away from her makeshift bedding. Her child, yes, she has one, is crying behind her. The villagers whisper and nod. Of course she's a witch. Look at her rags. Listen to her voice. Then there's Sarah Osborne, already sick, barely able to stand. The guards have to support her just to bring her to the meeting house. No one offers her a blanket. And Tituba, she probably sees what's coming. She's been a servant in this house long enough to know how quickly favor can sour, but no one's listening to her now. Just watching, judging. Inside the meeting house, the questioning begins, and let's be clear, it's not an interrogation by modern standards. You're guilty until proven innocent, and even then you're probably still guilty. If you confess, you might be spared. If you deny it, you're stubborn, and probably in league with Satan. Sarah Good denies everything, fiercely. She mocks her accusers and calls the girls liars. That doesn't help her case. Sarah Osborne also denies it, but her weak voice and frailty make her less of a threat. Still, she's marked. But Tituba does something unexpected. She confesses, and not just a simple, yes, I'm a witch. She gives them theater. She describes seeing the devil, a tall man in black with white hair. She talks about animals, black dogs, red cats, yellow birds. She says she flew through the air on a pole. She names other witches. She says they're everywhere. The magistrates lean in. The villagers gasp. And suddenly they have proof, real proof in their eyes. Not just a sickness, not just gossip, but a witness right here who's telling them what they feared all along. The devil is in Salem. Historians still argue whether Tituba's confession was strategic or coerced. Was she trying to protect herself by giving them what they wanted? Or had she been manipulated, broken down by threats and isolation? Either way, her story explodes, like wildfire. Here's a bizarre detail for your collection. Tituba said the devil had a book in which witches signed their names in blood. She claimed to see 9 names in it, but couldn't read them. This image, a literal witch sign-up sheet, grabs the imagination of the public. They want to know who's next, who else signed. And suddenly, it's not about these 3 women anymore. It's about everyone. The judges decide to send all 3 women to jail, where they will wait for formal trial. And by jail, don't imagine cells with metal bars and TV privileges. These are dark, damp, rat-infested pits. Sarah Good's child is jailed with her. Osborne's health declines rapidly. Tituba, even after cooperating, remains behind bars. But the real effect of this moment is psychic, because once the accusations begin, they don't stop. Now, you see people glancing sideways at neighbors. Someone who once lent you flour now avoids your gaze. The woods seem darker, the wind more sinister. Everything feels off. You know what this is like? It's like when someone yawns in a room and then everyone starts yawning. But instead of yawns, it's accusations. It starts with a few, then a dozen, then dozens. Soon, Salem will drown in names, but for now, you lie back on a rough cot in a creaky cold house and close your eyes. Behind your eyelids, you still see Tituba's wild story. The devil's book, the black dogs, the flying stick. You can't shake the feeling that something has shifted, that Salem is no longer just a village, it's a stage, and everyone's about to get cast whether they want to or not. You wake up with a start, heart pounding from a dream that felt too real. Tituba's yellow bird was pecking at your chest, and somewhere in the dream, a voice whispered your name, just your name, over and over again. Outside, the roosters are crowing, but even they sound uneasy. You shuffle to the doorway and squint at the sunrise slicing through the mist. Salem Village looks the same, but it doesn't feel the same. The air is thicker, now, heavy with suspicion. You can almost taste it, like ash and iron. It's been days since Tituba's confession, and yet somehow, the fear has only gotten louder. The girls are still at the center of it all. Abigail Williams, Betty Paris, and now others. Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, Elizabeth Hubbard. A growing gang of afflicted girls who twitch and scream and point fingers with theatrical flair. They roll their eyes back, claw at invisible hands, cry out that spirits are tormenting them. And every time they name someone new, the adults take it seriously. Deadly seriously. This is where things start to unravel. Fast. You wander to the tavern, eavesdropping on whispered conversations. The list of accused is growing daily. Rebecca Nurse, a respected and elderly woman, everyone's collective grandma, is suddenly labeled a witch. Her only crime? Possibly having too many sons with too much land. That, and being caught in a feud with the Putnam family, whose daughter, conveniently, is one of the afflicted. Historians still argue whether Ann Putnam, Sr. manipulated her daughter's accusations to gain power and settle scores, or whether they both truly believed the devil had slipped into town like a fox in a henhouse. And then there's Martha Corey. She laughs, when told about the accusations, which only makes people more convinced she's hiding something. Her husband Giles tries to defend her, but that backfires too. We'll get to Giles later. Spoiler, it doesn't end well for him. You lean in at the edge of a crowded meeting house. The afflicted girls are performing again, flopping to the ground, crying that spirits are biting them. Some even claim to see specters floating above the heads of the accused like evil halos. It would be absurd if it weren't so effective. You notice something important now, the way the village treats these girls. Suddenly, they're not just children. They're divine instruments, like human weather vanes, twitching in the presence of evil. Their words carry weight. They point and people go to jail. Power like that is intoxicating. You see it in their eyes, in the sly glances when no one's watching. You begin to wonder, do they even know where the act ends and belief begins? The accusations start spilling. Outside the village, Salem town, Andover, Ipswich, all begin to feel the tremors. More arrests, more fear, more spirits fluttering around in the imaginations of children and adults alike. Here's something weird for your mental scrapbook. Some accused witches were charged with sending their specters to torment people from inside jail. That's right. You're locked in a freezing, filthy cell and someone still claims they saw your ghost gnawing on their kneecap across town. And the court? They believe it. Meanwhile, the jails are bursting. People are chained, starved, freezing. Families go bankrupt trying to support imprisoned loved ones, paying outrageous fees just to keep them alive or send food. Some even have to pay for the chains used to bind them. You can't make this stuff up. The legal system is in chaos. The usual standards of evidence are slipping. One girl claims a woman's specter bit her, and when they examine the accused, guess what? A bite mark. That's proof. Another claims a book appeared in her lap asking for her signature. Just like that, another name gets added to the devil's guest list. And if you're wondering whether anyone dared to push back, yes, a few tried. John Proctor, a local farmer, openly called the girls frauds, said they were just putting on a show, which in Puritan logic made him suspicious, because only a witch would try to discredit God's chosen seers. Now his family is under suspicion. You watch as fear mutates into strategy, grudges resurface, land disputes, business rivalries, awkward glances from 20 years ago all suddenly reinterpreted as evidence of witchery. And once you're accused, good luck clawing your way back to normal. The stain doesn't wash out. Remember when your mom warned you that one lie leads to another? This is like that, but on fire and screaming. Oh, and another quirky twist. Some villagers begin showing signs of possession just by being near an accused person. Think of it as spiritual secondhand smoke. You don't have to be the target anymore. You just have to sit next to one at the meeting house and boom, there goes your ability to walk in a straight line. You take a walk through the fields just to breathe, but even here, you can feel it. The cows are restless. The crops seem stunted. Superstition infects every part of life. People stop baking bread from certain grain because it smells off. Horses refuse to walk past certain houses. Everything feels cursed. The girls continue their performances, but they're no longer the same frightened children they were weeks ago. They've become stars. The village hangs on their every scream. The more dramatic the accusation, the greater the applause. And yet, you can't help but notice, they never accuse the most powerful people. Not yet. Not the wealthiest merchants or the politically connected. It's always the easy targets. The widows, the poor, the sick, the inconvenient. You sit down beneath an old elm, rubbing your arms against the chill. The sun is high, but it offers no warmth. The trials haven't even officially begun. But already Salem has started to eat itself. You sit quietly near the flickering hearth as the village grows restless. Outside, the trees seem to lean in closer. The wind whispers things it probably shouldn't know. Inside Reverend Parris's house, the atmosphere is heavy. His niece Abigail Williams and daughter Betty still tremble with strange fits, muttering things under their breath, contorting, shrieking, claiming unseen hands pinch and scratch them. It's like something invisible is stalking the room, and let's face it, you're not thrilled to be in the splash zone. As pressure mounts, people want names. Someone must be doing this. Someone must be responsible. After all, it's unthinkable that young Puritan girls might be playing tricks, having psychological breakdowns, or reacting to, say, toxic mold in the rye. No, clearly, this is the devil's handiwork, and he never works alone. Eventually, 3 names rise from the girl's lips like smoke: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba. Tituba. This is where things get murky and theatrical. She's an enslaved woman, brought from the West Indies and owned by Reverend Parris. She lives on the margins of Puritan society, steeped in other traditions, other beliefs. That makes her the perfect target. Too foreign, too different, too convenient. When she's accused, no one leaps to her defense. You know that feeling. When you're blamed for something in a group project just because you're new and quiet. Multiply that by colonial racism, sprinkle in some fire and brimstone theology, and you've got the inferno that surrounds Tituba. Under interrogation, well, let's call it what it was. Intense, probably terrifying coercion. Tituba doesn't deny the charge. She leans in. She claims she's seen the devil, that he came to her in many forms: a tall man in black, a pig, a dog, even a yellow bird. She spins a wild tale. There's a witch's book with red binding and 9 names already signed inside. She speaks of flying through the air, strange rituals, and conversations with creatures. It's vivid, theatrical, and frankly, it sounds like she's trying to give the audience what they want so they'll stop asking questions with whips in hand. And here's the real twist. She says she was forced into it, that she didn't want to consort with Satan but was threatened. She weaves in the other accused, Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, dragging them down with her in what might have been a desperate attempt to shift blame, protect herself, or just survive one more day. This confession does not quell the village's hysteria. No, it adds gasoline to the fire. Because if witches are real, and Tituba says they are, then who knows how many walk among you. Suddenly, every odd glance, every poorly churned batch of butter, every baby born with a freckle becomes suspicious. You start to wonder, did Goody Proctor really trip over her cow by accident? Or was it hexed? Tituba's confession is critical, not because it proves anything, but because it validates the growing panic. You can almost hear the villagers exhale. See, they whisper, we're not crazy. There are witches among us. Some historians believe Tituba's confession was strategic. She might have picked up on the bizarre expectations of her interrogators, Puritans hungry for dramatic proof of the devil. So, she gives it to them. Every eerie detail. Others suggest that her background in Caribbean folklore and oral tradition may have influenced the imagery she used: birds, beasts, devilmen with books of names. These aren't foreign to her, just reframed under Puritan eyes. And then there's the fringe theory, whispered among scholars with raised brows, that maybe Tituba really believed what she said. That maybe in a world this superstitious, even the storytellers can forget they're telling stories. Historians still argue whether Tituba's confession was survival instinct, spiritual belief, or sheer performance. Whatever her motive, it works, for a time. While Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne are hauled away, Tituba remains alive. She's imprisoned, yes, but not executed. Ironically, the one who confessed ends up dodging the hangman's noose, while those who maintain innocence don't. It's a dark irony that ripples through the entire episode. Confess and live, or deny and die. A lose-lose logic that would twist even the most honest minds. You notice something odd, though. After Tituba's confession, the afflictions among the girls become more intense, more dramatic. They faint in church, howl at shadows, shriek when certain villagers pass by. It's like the village itself is performing. Trapped in a play no one can stop. And the audience? They've bought front row seats and popcorn. Meanwhile, Tituba remains, locked up. She'll eventually spend over a year in prison, forgotten by the court, unpaid for by her master, left in a system that doesn't care whether she lives or dies. When she's finally released, it's not to freedom but to another buyer. Her fate, like so many others caught in this storm, drifts into obscurity. Still, her voice echoes. The story she told lit a fuse. And Salem? It's about to explode. You hear the clank of iron shackles before you see the faces. Salem's jails, suddenly overcrowded, creak and groan under the weight of the accused. Names pile up like firewood, each one more shocking than the last. What started with 3 has grown to dozens, and the accusations? They're flying faster than common sense can keep up. Sarah Good, a beggar with a sharp tongue and few friends, is among the first. Her reputation does her no favors. People say she mutters when she walks away from them. Must be curses, right? That's what one woman says anyway, swearing her livestock fell ill right after a run-in with Good. Never mind that the cow was already half-starved. Details aren't Salem's strong suit right now. Sarah Osborne is easier to pin down. She hasn't been to church in months, which in Puritan terms might as well be a full-blown admission of guilt. Add to that some questionable land dealings and a sickly appearance, and voila, another perfect scapegoat. She doesn't survive long in jail. She dies before the court can even formally sentence her. A witch, they whisper, or just an old woman who didn't get enough bread and blankets. Your guess is as good as anyone's, but it's not just outcasts and misfits now. The accusations start creeping into the respectable corners of the village. Martha Corey, a church-going woman with opinions gasp, is arrested. Her husband Giles is stunned. He thought church membership might shield them. Spoiler, it does not. Next comes Rebecca Nurse. Sweet, elderly, beloved. She's everything Salem says it values. Piety, humility, charity. And yet a few twitching girls shriek her name, and boom, her good reputation collapses like soggy bread in the rain. Even you, just watching this unravel, feel your stomach twist. If Rebecca Nurse isn't safe, who is? Now the pattern is clear. Once someone is accused, the pressure on them and everyone around them ratchets up to 11. Neighbors start pointing fingers, hoping to deflect suspicion. Confessions are encouraged. Think group project blame shifting. But with Gallows and the kids, they're not just along for the ride anymore. Abigail Williams, Betty Paris, and now others, Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, they're practically celebrities. Crowds gather to watch their fits. They twitch and wail with such drama you'd think someone smuggled a theater troupe into Salem. When they scream and say someone's specter is tormenting them, that person is arrested. Simple as that. Specters, by the way, are a legal nightmare. Imagine being held accountable for what a dream version of you supposedly did. That's what's happening here. If a girl claims your ghost pinched her, you're suddenly in irons. It's absurd, but in 1692, absurdity gets a seat at the court table. By spring, the number of accused skyrockets. Over 100 people are imprisoned across the colony, and you can feel it. Salem is tipping from fear into full hysteria. Normal rules of logic are tossed aside. You know that moment in a horror movie where the music goes silent and something terrible is about to happen? Yeah, Salem is playing that tune on repeat. The Putnam family plays a significant role here, especially Ann Putnam Sr., who fans the flames with righteous fervor. Her daughter Ann Jr. is among the most active accusers, naming names with eerie confidence. Some later speculate the Putnams had property disputes with several of the accused. Convenient, right? Historians still argue whether these accusations were sincere belief or strategic power, grabs wrapped in religious panic. One lesser-known, but spicy, theory that some of the afflicted girls had epilepsy or another neurological condition that caused hallucinations and convulsions. Or maybe, just maybe, it was all stress. Being a teenager in a rigid fire and brimstone society with zero privacy, arranged marriages, and a weekly threat of damnation could make anyone snap, especially if acting out got you attention and protection. A more fringe tidbit, some early scholars proposed that ergot fungus, found on damp rye bread, might have triggered hallucinations and paranoia. Salem's breadbasket, literally the villain. It's a tasty theory, but most modern researchers aren't sold. Still, next time you see moldy toast, maybe toss it. As the arrests continue, you start to see cracks forming in the community. Not everyone's cheering the witch hunt. Some folks begin to mutter that things are getting out of hand, but no one dares say it too loudly. Speak against the trials, and you might find yourself shackled next. And remember, innocence is not a get-out-of-jail-free card in Salem. It's more of a dare. What truly haunts you, though, are the mundane details. The way prisoners are chained in freezing cells, the whispered prayers, the children left behind, the bread rations too stale to chew. This isn't a fantastical world of potions and flying broomsticks. It's a jail cell that smells like mildew. And panic. And the fear? It doesn't look like fire. It looks like paperwork, church pews, and neighbors keeping secrets. The village becomes a maze of suspicion. If you speak too softly, you're hiding something. If you speak too loudly, you're drawing attention. You walk the line, you smile, you nod. And you pray, mostly that no one notices you, but someone always does. You wake to the clang of hammers on wood. Not from a gallows yet, but from a makeshift courthouse being prepared. The jails are bursting, the whispers are deafening, and the colony's legal system, it's straining at the seams. So in May of 1692, the Massachusetts governor, Sir William Phips, returns from fighting up north and is greeted with a hometown horror show. His solution? Form a special tribunal to deal with the chaos. It's called the Court of Oyer and Terminer, which sounds fancy until you learn it, just means to hear and determine. You get the unsettling sense they've skipped the think, critically and fact-check part. Presiding over the court is William Stoughton, a man who combines the warmth of a stone slab with the judgment style of a Salem Yelp reviewer in a very bad mood. He's devout, rigid, and entirely too eager to believe in spectral evidence. That is, dreams and ghostly visions offered as legit proof. You watch people line up outside the courthouse like it's open mic night for trauma. The afflicted girls arrive in droves, wailing, spasming, pointing invisible fingers. It's performance art meets moral panic, and it would be hilarious if it weren't sending people to the noose. Inside, the trials are fast, like microwave burrito fast. The court isn't looking to explore nuance. You're either with God or you're a witch. There's little space for, hey, maybe this is mass hysteria, or could we get a second opinion? Instead, a few accusations, a spectral pinch or two, and boom, guilty. Take the case of Elizabeth Proctor, wife of John Proctor. She's pregnant when accused, which delays her execution, but she still sits in jail for months, waiting for the child's birth, and maybe her own death. John, her husband, dares to criticize the court, a risky move. Spoiler, he ends up accused, too. Salem, where honesty is hazardous. The court also reactivates ancient English laws about witchcraft that should have been retired alongside powdered wigs. You're stunned to see how flimsy the legal process is. Hearsay counts. Emotional testimony counts. Physical evidence not required. No devil horns or broomsticks necessary, just a bad reputation and maybe an unlucky sneeze during church. One woman, Dorcas Good, is only 4 years old when she's accused. Yes, 4. Her main crime? Her mother is Sarah Good, one of the original accused. Dorcas supposedly bites during her spectral visits. She ends up imprisoned for months, chained in a cell no child should ever see. When she's finally released, she's not the same. The trauma doesn't just haunt, it calcifies in her. You wonder if anyone's taking a step back here. If anyone's asking, have we lost the plot? But the truth is, they haven't just lost it. They've buried it under court transcripts and religious fervor. To be fair, not everyone on the court is fully on board. Some express doubts, quietly, cautiously. But in a courtroom where even skepticism might earn you a witch label, most keep their concerns behind tight lips and tighter collars. Meanwhile, the records pile up. Testimonies are written by candlelight, smudged by cold fingers. You read them and feel the desperation in the ink. People confess to impossible things, flying, communing with dark spirits, signing devil's books. Many confess under duress, or after weeks of brutal imprisonment. Others deny everything, standing by their innocence with trembling resolve. Guess which ones are more likely to die? Historians still argue whether the court was truly convinced of its own righteousness or just caught in a self-made moral trap. Maybe they really believed the devil was in Salem, or maybe they were too scared to admit they'd lost control. On the fringe side of things, some speculate about psychological contagion, like a groupthink illness that spreads faster than the pox. One person panics, another mimics, and suddenly half the town's acting like it's auditioning for a haunted house. It's not a scientific diagnosis, but watching the courtroom, it doesn't feel far off. And yet, despite how surreal it all seems, this is real. These are real people being shackled, tried, and sentenced to death. The law, twisted into a blunt weapon, slices through families, friendships, and reputations. The court isn't just a legal body now. It's a stage, and on that stage, guilt is in vogue. The court sessions stretch on, and with every verdict, the town's tension tightens. There are murmurs of unease, of doubt, but for now the machinery grinds forward. You realize the scariest thing isn't the devil. It's a group of people who think they're right, so right that they can't see how wrong they've become. Outside, the townsfolk gather to hear each new ruling. Some cheer, others watch with silent dread. You catch a glimpse of a man staring, too long, his jaw clenched. He doesn't believe this, not really, but he doesn't speak, not yet, because in Salem, speaking out can get you something far worse than strange looks. It can get you a rope. You hear the bell toll. It rings out across the village green, hollow and slow, a sound that settles into your chest like a weight. Today, for the first time, someone will die because of this madness. The name whispered across Salem's wind is Bridget Bishop. She's been accused before back in 1680, but that was a different era. Back then, the court found her suspicious, but not enough to hang. Now, though? Now Salem's mood is different. Desperate, paranoid, hungry for resolution. And Bridget? She's the perfect target. You walk with the crowd as they gather for the execution. The air feels off, humid but cold under the skin. It's June 10th, 1692, and everything looks normal. The trees sway, chickens cluck in the distance. The sky is stubbornly blue, but there's a kind of invisible pressure, like the village itself is holding its breath. Bridget is a woman who doesn't fit the mold. She wears bright colors, red bodices, and talks back. She owns a tavern. She gossips. She's been married several times. She's exactly the kind of woman that Puritan society mistrusts. Outspoken, independent, and not particularly interested in blending in. In short, she's a social migraine for Salem's elite. At her trial, the afflicted girls convulse at her. Mere glance. One claims Bridget's specter tore her cap. Another says she saw her sitting on a beam like a demonic pigeon. It's absurd, and you almost laugh until you remember that the judges are nodding solemnly. Bridget pleads innocent, over and over. She stands tall, defiant, saying, "I am no witch." But the court's already decided. After all, why would these trembling girls lie? They don't bother with a long delay. The sentence is passed. She is to be hanged. Now here you are, at Gallows Hill, a small rise just outside town. There's no proper scaffold. Not really. Just a makeshift gibbet, a rope, and a crowd that doesn't know whether to pray or cheer. A sheriff reads the sentence, and Bridget, eyes steady, says nothing. She doesn't scream. She doesn't beg. She just waits. And then the trap drops. It's fast. Too fast. And yet the silence afterward feels eternal. You stand there stunned as the crowd slowly disperses. A few people murmur, shake their heads, others look away. But no one does anything. No one says, "Wait, this is wrong." Not yet. You can't stop thinking about how Bridget's life ended because she wore a red dress and annoyed the wrong people. Historians still argue whether her execution was the moment the tide began to turn. Did people start to question the legitimacy of the trials? Or was this just the beginning of something much darker? You wouldn't blame them for thinking it was the latter, because after Bridget's death, the machine doesn't slow, it accelerates. Over the summer, the Court of Oyer and Terminer hears case after case. Confessions, denials, tears, seizures, each day more intense than the last. More and more people are condemned. Each time someone dies, the horror becomes a little more ordinary. That's the chilling part. The village gets used to it. And yet, not all executions are so swift. Take Sarah Good. You remember her, grumpy, poor, likely suffering from mental illness. She's hanged in July alongside 4 others, but not before she delivers a line that chills you even now. When the Reverend Nicholas Noyes urges her to confess and save her soul, she snaps, "You're a liar. I am no more a witch than you are a wizard. And if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." Sounds theatrical, right? Except here's the kicker. Noyes allegedly dies of a hemorrhage years later. Coincidence? Probably. But it gives you shivers all the same. One quirky but very real detail. Before the executions, prisoners are often searched for witches' teats. Small moles or blemishes supposedly used to nurse demonic familiars. You glance down at your own arm and spot a freckle. Uh-oh. Guess you're on the list too. The method of execution never varies. Hanging. Contrary to popular lore, no one is burned. That was more of a European witch-hunting specialty. Here in Salem, the gallows do the job. Quick, cheap, and depressingly repeatable. But even hanging has its quirks. The bodies aren't buried properly. In many cases, families aren't even allowed to retrieve them. The corpses are dumped in shallow graves near the hill. Locals whisper of dogs digging up bones. Others say they've seen specters near the site, ghosts of the condemned still wandering. And all this time, the spectral evidence continues to dominate the courtroom. People dream of flying witches, wake up crying, and that's enough to issue an arrest warrant. You wonder how anyone sleeps without dreaming of their neighbor floating outside the window. Meanwhile, you notice some people beginning to pull away. A few ministers write cautious letters suggesting the court may be overreaching, but most stay silent. After all, who wants to be the one defending witches? Even the colony's most educated minds seem stuck in a loop. Cotton Mather, Harvard-educated minister and influential thinker, advises caution about spectral evidence, but never fully condemns the trials. His father, Increase Mather, will later take a firmer stance, but for now, his voice is a whisper, not a shield. By the end of summer, the number of dead reaches 19, and Salem has started to fracture. Families are ruined, children are orphaned, fields lie untended, the economy stumbles, but the gallows keep swinging. And yet, through all of this, the faces you remember most belong to the girls, still convulsing, still crying, still pointing. Are they truly tormented or just terrified teenagers caught in a spiral they can't stop? Whatever the answer, Salem isn't slowing down. The execution of Bridget Bishop has opened a door, and now that it's swinging, it might not shut until everything, logic, compassion, truth, falls through it. You're beginning to lose count. Another morning, another name, another cart of prisoners creaking toward Gallows Hill. It's like a grim clockwork. Arrest, trial, hang, repeat. And while the town's moral spine continues to bend, the accusations don't just persist, they evolve. It starts small, as these things always do, but now the circle is widening. At first, it was the low-hanging fruit, poor women, social outcasts, those already muttered about behind pews and porches. But now the finger-pointing is reaching into the heart of respected society, because the frenzy doesn't care who you are, and you, dear listener, are standing in the middle of it. You hear the whispers about Rebecca Nurse, a pious elderly woman, well-liked, devout, a woman who prays daily and whose neighbors call her saintly, and yet even she is not safe. You can still picture her, shuffling quietly through her home, surrounded by grandchildren, never imagining that a false accusation would drag her from her bed to a prison cell. The evidence against her? Dreams, phantom pinches, and the ever-dependable, she gave me a look. That, plus a little inter-family drama, because of course someone in town is bitter about a land dispute with the Nurse family. It's like a Thanksgiving argument turned lethal. Her trial draws a crowd. People can't believe she's there. Many speak in her defense. And when the jury initially finds her not guilty, you exhale. Maybe, just maybe, this is the moment when common sense wins. But then the afflicted girls shriek, they collapse dramatically, and the judge, William Stoughton, remember our stone-faced friend, asked the jury to reconsider. Let that sink in. The verdict is already read, but he gives them a polite little, "Want to try that again?" They do, and this time, they find her guilty. It's a surreal betrayal of the justice system, and it's not the last. The message is clear. No one is safe. Not the poor, not the old, not the respected. The noose doesn't discriminate. Rebecca Nurse is hanged in July, her final words soft and prayerful. Later, her family risks everything to retrieve her body and bury her secretly on their property. She doesn't get a marked grave, but today you can visit the Nurse homestead in Danvers and stand where she once lived. Some say her ghost still lingers, not in malice, but in mourning. The accusations balloon from there. George Burroughs, a former minister of Salem, is next. He's living in Maine at the time, quite literally out of town and out of mind. But someone remembers a grudge. One complaint leads to another. Before long, he's dragged back to face charges. They say he has superhuman strength, that he lifts muskets with one finger. Clearly, witchcraft, or maybe just Jim Day. At his execution, he stands at the gallows and, get this, recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly. That may sound mundane to you, but in 1692 it's believed that no witch can do it. So when the crowd hears him say, "Forgive us our trespasses," they pause, they hesitate, and for the first time, Doubt swells like a ripple through the gathered crowd. But Stoughton doesn't budge. Burroughs is hanged anyway. Later, Martha Corey, wife of Giles Corey, is accused. Her crime? Daring to suggest that the afflicted girls might be lying. That kind of talk gets you a one-way ticket to jail. Giles, in his loyalty, speaks in her defense. And, wouldn't you know it, he's accused too. You start to see how paranoia breeds faster than mold on old bread. Friend accuses friend. Husbands turn on wives. Children testify against parents. It's not just fear anymore. It's weaponized. One bizarre side effect of all this, people start using accusations strategically. Got a neighbor you hate? Accuse them. Owe someone money? Claim they visited you in spectral form and tried to choke you. It's community theater meets courtroom drama, meets vindictive Yelp review, and the judges take it all seriously. Historians still argue whether some accusers believe their claims or were just playing along. Maybe it started as mass hysteria and spiraled into deliberate manipulation, or maybe both, a deadly Venn diagram of delusion and vengeance. And then there's the animal angle, because yes, even animals are accused. A dog is shot after being declared a tool of the devil. Another is hanged. You're not sure what's more disturbing, that someone tried to exorcise a puppy or that they thought it worked. By now, the jail cells are overflowing. Conditions are horrifying. Dark, damp, crawling with lice and sickness. Prisoners are chained, starved, and crammed in with the rats. If the gallows don't kill you, the dungeon just might. One quirky tidbit that sticks with you. There's a story about one of the accused hiding a poppet, a kind of homemade doll thought to be used in witchcraft. Found sewn into a mattress, it becomes evidence against the person who owned the bed. It's all very Toy Story meets Puritan nightmare. And still, the court listens. The afflicted girls, once just a few, are now a chorus of pain. They point. They scream. They reenact imaginary torments like it's the season finale of a soap opera. And the adults astonishingly believe it. You catch yourself wondering, did no one think to stop and ask, wait, what if this is all a performance? The sad answer is that a few did, and they ended up on the accused list themselves. What began as a cluster of strange behavior among a handful of girls has bloomed into a full-blown social implosion. Salem is unraveling. The line between law and superstition, between truth and hearsay, is no longer blurred. It's obliterated. The trials no longer feel like a quest for justice. They feel like a purge, a method of cleansing the town of anything inconvenient, disobedient, or just plain different. And you, stuck in the thick of it, are starting to realize the deeper this goes, the harder it will be to crawl back out. The accusations expand like ivy up a crumbling wall, quiet at first, then wild and suffocating. You walk the packed dirt roads of Salem Village, glancing nervously at the faces of your neighbors. No one is safe now. You might be a good Puritan, a churchgoer, a landowner, or a midwife who's delivered half the babies in town. Doesn't matter. A glance too long, a muttered prayer, a poorly timed sneeze. It's all suspicious now. Even your kindness can be turned against you. At the heart of the storm, the afflicted girls are relentless. More than a dozen of them now flail, shriek, and point trembling fingers at anyone unfortunate enough to cross their paths. Their cries of being tormented by specters ripple through courtrooms packed tighter than an August root cellar. You hear? The name of Martha Corey whispered in the crowd. Martha, the pious woman married to Giles Corey, the grizzled farmer with a spine made of hickory. She's not just accused. She's dragged to jail like a common criminal. You try to wrap your head around that. Martha, a full member of the church. She was supposed to be above suspicion. If she can be accused, anyone can. It's about now you realize the rules have officially left the building. Spectral evidence, dreams, visions, ghostly fingerprints is being accepted as hard proof. It would be funny if it weren't lethal. Someone says they saw your spirit floating above their bed while you slept at home. Congratulations, you're on trial. And if you deny it, well, obviously the devil is helping you lie. You can't win. It's the world's worst game of tag and everyone's it. By mid-spring 1692, the number of accused shoots past 50. By summer, it's over 100, and the social circles widen. It's not just outcasts anymore. Now it's merchants, farmers, mothers, ministers. Rebecca nurses next. You almost gasp aloud when you hear her name. Sweet, gray-haired, grandmotherly Rebecca. She once helped you when you sprained your ankle, but a few girls scream in her presence, and suddenly she's chained and hauled away. Her case is a turning point. The nurse family is respected, landowning, and deeply religious. If Rebecca can fall, no one is untouchable. The trial is packed and you sneak into the back row, heart pounding. You watch her stand tall as girls writhe and moan on the floorboards. Her composure is remarkable. When asked how she pleads, she says, "I am innocent as the child unborn." It makes your throat tighten. Even now, she holds her head high. At first, the jury returns a verdict of not guilty. Relief washes through the courtroom, briefly, then chaos. The afflicted girls begin their fits anew, screaming that Rebecca's spirit is attacking them. The magistrates, in a twist of theatrical horror, ask the jury to reconsider. They do. The second verdict, guilty. That's when you understand. This isn't justice. This is theater. And the crowd eats it up like it's fair day pie. Why is it spreading so fast? Historians still argue whether it was mass hysteria, cold revenge, or a deeply strategic power play. Some whisper about land disputes, accuse someone of witchcraft, and maybe you get their farm. Others blame it on generations of tension simmering just below Salem's icy surface. Old grudges, family feuds, religion wrapped around politics like thorns on a branch. And then there's fear itself, a contagious, invisible thing that sinks into your bones and refuses to leave. You pass Reverend George Burroughs on the road one morning and see the worry etched into his brow. Once a minister, in Salem now he's an accused witch. A former spiritual leader now being accused of leading satanic rites. That's like your favorite math teacher being accused of summoning demons during algebra. It doesn't compute. But fear has thrown logic in a sack and tossed it in the river. Meanwhile, the jails are overflowing. Ipswich, Boston, and Salem's lockups groan under the weight of the accused. Pregnant women, elderly men, children as young as 4. You see Sarah Good's little daughter, Dorcas, sobbing in a cell too small for her to stretch out in. You wonder if she even understands why she's there. And outside, the town keeps turning. Fields must still be plowed, bread still baked. Yet, every conversation is laced with suspicion. You stop talking to your neighbor. She once bought herbs from a woman who's now accused. You burn the charms your grandmother gave you, just in case. You avoid eye contact in church. A small twitch might mean the devil's got you. The judges? They lean harder into spectral evidence and confessions. They push the accused to name names, and many do, hoping for leniency. Suddenly you're seeing neighbors betray each other like it's the village sport. It's a macabre chain reaction. Accusations birth more accusations. You think of it as a kind of social wildfire. Fuel, spark, wind, and everything goes up in flames. There's a moment you won't forget. A teenage boy stands in court, accused by the girls. They claim he sent a specter to choke them. He cries, saying he's never harmed anyone. One of the judges leans forward and tells him the only way to be saved is to confess. The boy hesitates. His eyes dart around the courtroom, and finally he whispers, "Yes, I am a witch." And just like that, he lives, at least for now. You feel sick. Innocence has become a death sentence. Lies are your only lifeline. You wonder who's next. Your brother? Your midwife? You? Every day begins with a question. Will I make it through without being accused? The gallows loom on the hill, an ever-present reminder that fear has teeth and it is hungry. You remember the sound first. A low, groaning creak as wooden beams strain under the weight of something, or someone. That sound has started to haunt your dreams. You hear it again now as you step cautiously onto the green field behind the jail. There, in the center of the grass, stands the makeshift press. 2 large flat boards, iron weights stacked like dark monuments to silence. You've heard the whispers. They're going to press him. They're going to press Giles Corey. It's almost unbelievable. Giles is 81, a stubborn, weathered farmer with more grit than most men half his age. You've seen him in the fields, swinging an axe like he's got a score to settle with the trees. Now he's lying beneath boards in the dirt, his face half buried in soil. He's refused to plead. Not guilty, nothing. Just silence. Because under Puritan law, if you don't enter a plea, you can't be tried. And if you're not tried, your land doesn't automatically get confiscated by the government. It's his final stand, a protest written in broken ribs and bruises. The authorities have decided to encourage him to talk by stacking stones, one by one. You flinch each time a weight is added. Giles doesn't scream. He doesn't beg. He just grits his teeth and stares straight ahead, eyes like iron nails. When he finally speaks, his voice is hoarse and dry. More, Wait, he rasps. You feel something in your chest crack open at those words. Not ribs, something deeper. Historians still argue whether Giles truly meant to die as a martyr, or if he was just too ornery to give the court the satisfaction of a confession. Either way, his final act becomes legend. A man crushed to death by fear, by injustice, by the literal weight of a society gone mad. The town falls into a hushed silence after his death. Something has shifted. This wasn't just a hanging. This was slow, deliberate, torturous. Even the most pious among the villagers can't help but whisper that maybe, just maybe, the devil isn't the one behind this. Maybe it's them, but the trials don't stop. Not yet. Giles's wife, Martha Corey, is hanged just 3 days later. Her crime? Being a vocal skeptic of the whole witchcraft panic. She said early on that the girls were faking it. That truth didn't sit well. The Puritans have become allergic to doubt. So now she swings from the gallows alongside 6 others, including that same Rebecca nurse who once nursed your ankle and probably knitted half the town's baby clothes. The gallows have become part of the landscape now. Gallows Hill, grim, name, fitting mood. You sometimes see the crows circling there before you even hear the execution bell. Each time someone is hanged, a crowd gathers, some mourning, others eager for spectacle. People bring bread, stand with their children, and talk in hushed voices about who's next. You hate how normal it's all begun to feel. Like the weather or the harvest, it's just another hanging day. One quirky detail you overhear from a jail guard sticks with you. Sarah Good, another accused, muttered a curse before she died. Supposedly, when the Reverend urged her to confess, she sneered and said, "I'm no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take my life, God will give you blood to drink." The Reverend reportedly choked to death on his own blood years. Later, coincidence? Maybe. Salem doesn't do coincidence anymore. And then there's George Burroughs. Remember him? The former minister? He's brought to trial now, and the accusations against him are the most fantastical yet. The girls claim he flies through the air, lifts massive barrels effortlessly, and hosts satanic mass in the woods. Basically, if the devil has a LinkedIn, Burroughs is his top endorsement. But here's the twist. During his execution, just before he's hanged, he recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly, fluently. That's supposed to be impossible for a witch. The crowd pauses. Murmurs ripple through the onlookers. Maybe this man really is innocent. Maybe the court got it wrong. But the executioner doesn't flinch. Rope tightens. Feet dangle. Justice, such as it is, marches on. You start to notice something else. The girls, the afflicted. Their fits are louder now, more dramatic. They scream during the trials, throw themselves on the floor, and clutch invisible wounds. But some villagers are beginning to side-eye the performance. Are they really tormented? Or are they just performing for the crowd? One girl, Ann Putnam Jr., seems to accuse almost everyone who's ever disagreed with her family. Historians later wonder if it was a land grab, a personal grudge, or just a teenager caught up in the world's worst drama club. Still, even with doubt blooming, the executions continue. Over the course of just a few months, 19 people are hanged and 1, poor Giles, is crushed. 2 dogs are even executed for suspected witchcraft. Yes, dogs. You make eye contact with your own pup and whisper, "Lay low, buddy." Nothing is safe. What began as a few sick girls and whispered rumors has turned into a full-blown purge. And every time you think it can't get worse, it does. Accusations now stretch beyond Salem village. Towns like Andover and Ipswich are swept into the madness. The judges travel, holding court in town after town, leaving broken families and fresh graves behind. Your neighbor tells you her cousin confessed to witchcraft just to avoid hanging. You don't blame her. It's the only strategy that seems to work. You lie, you live, you tell the truth, you die. That's not justice, that's survival roulette. Still, people keep watching, and the gallows keep creaking. You wonder how much longer this madness can go on. But in your gut, you already know something has to break, and soon. You wake to quiet. Not peace, just that eerie, tight-lipped kind of silence that hovers over a town after too many funerals. The air feels heavier than usual. You step outside and glance up toward Gallows Hill, half expecting to see another set of feet dangling. But not today. For once, the sky is empty of rope and shadow. Still, there's no comfort in that, because you've heard the list. More names. Always more names. In just a few months, 19 people have been hanged, and Giles Corey was crushed to death for keeping his mouth shut. But it isn't over. Not yet. The courts still sit. The accused still rot in cramped, lice-infested jails. And the ministers? They still preach fire and brimstone, although a few have started to clear their throats and mumble about mercy. A little late, you think? Today, though, you hear something different. A voice. Not just whispers behind shutters, but a voice. Bold. Public. It belongs to Increase Mather, a leading Puritan minister back from London. He publishes a pamphlet that says what many have only dared think. It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. You almost drop your bread when you hear someone say it aloud. Someone's finally said it on paper, in ink. The tide, it seems, is beginning to turn. Of course, it doesn't happen all at once. No magic snap of fingers, but something in the air shifts. More and more people start questioning the trials. The reliance on spectral evidence starts to look flimsier than a Puritan's excuses at a quilting bee. You hear that several ministers, including Reverend Samuel Willard, are now urging caution. Even Cotton Mather, Increase's fiery son and one of the more enthusiastic supporters of the trials, starts dialing back his enthusiasm. He says spectral evidence should not be the sole reason someone is convicted. A small pivot, but it's there still. The court grinds on. September brings another wave of hangings. On the 22nd, 8 people are executed. 8 in one day. You attend, not because you want to, but because part of you can't look away. It's a horror you feel obligated to witness, as if sharing their final moments might somehow dilute your guilt for not doing more. Among them is Anne Pudeator, a wealthy, independent woman accused of bewitching her neighbors and possessing witches' ointments. What is that even? Fancy lotion? Historians still argue whether her potions were medical salves or just excuses to condemn an inconvenient woman. As the rope is tied around her neck, she shouts her innocence. No one listens. When the cart rolls away, you notice one of the executioners wipe a tear. Even the gallows crew is fraying. After that, the public mood shifts faster. Rumors fly that more townspeople are refusing to serve as jurors. Some are hiding accused friends in barns and basements. You start seeing fewer fingers pointing. The afflicted girls? They're still doing their routines, still crying and claiming. Specters scratch them. But now you hear muttering in the crowd, doubt, skepticism. You lock eyes with another villager during one of the girls' convulsions and exchange a look that says it all. This is getting ridiculous. Then comes the moment that finally cracks the trials open like an overripe pumpkin. The accusation of Mary Phipps. Yes, the governor's wife. You hear about it in a tavern, a whisper that spreads like spilled ale. One of the girls had the audacity, or perhaps the audacity and the exhaustion, to say Lady Phipps appeared to her as a specter. You don't even have time to process the absurdity before Governor William Phipps steps in. He returns from military business to find his colony in chaos. His response is swift and, frankly, overdue. On October 29, 1692, he dissolves the court of Oyer and Terminer, the very court responsible for the executions. Just like that, the trials are put on pause. And though new accusations still trickle in, they're no longer met with the same frenzy. In November, a new court is formed, the Superior Court of Judicature, and this one, thankfully, tosses spectral evidence out like yesterday's biscuit, crumbs. Without the ghost stories, the accusations start falling apart. Most of the remaining prisoners are acquitted or released. The hangings stop. The executions are over. But the damage? That's still very much alive. You pass by Salem jail and think of those still inside. Sarah Good's infant daughter died in that cell. So did Anne Foster after months of imprisonment. The weight of suffering doesn't disappear just because the court shuts down, and the town doesn't know what to do with the silence that follows. Some folks try to pretend it never happened. Others keep their heads down and thank God they survived. You just feel tired. Deep, bone deep, tired. There's a quirky little tidbit that sticks with you. Some folks start blaming the devil again, but not for the witchcraft. No, this time they say he tricked the courts into executing innocent people. So technically, they were still fighting evil. Just, extremely badly. You can't help but raise an eyebrow at that one. It's the kind of mental gymnastics only a Puritan can do without pulling a hamstring. One day you walk past the old meeting house, and it's quiet. No screams, no shackles, just the creak of the wood, the rustle of leaves, and the knowledge that something profound has broken, and maybe, just maybe, something wiser can grow in its place. You hope? You don't remember the last time the air felt still. Salem has been one long shriek for months, of fear, of grief, of unrelenting accusation. But now, as the last of the executions fade into the past and the courts retreat like wolves finally sated, a strange hush blankets the town. It's not peace exactly, more like a dazed kind of quiet, the silence after a storm when no one's quite ready to assess the damage. People walk differently now, heads lower, eyes darting less, not out of fear, but out of guilt. Because here's the thing, nearly everyone knew someone who died. A neighbor, a midwife, a merchant. Some are already whispering about reparations, though no one dares say it. Too loud. After all, what do you give to a family whose daughter was hanged? A basket of apples and a note that says, oops? It's going to take more than that. You sit on a bench outside the now mostly empty jailhouse where only a handful of prisoners remain. Some have been waiting for months without trial. Others confessed under duress and now linger in legal limbo. Even though the Superior Court of Judicature has replaced the old Court of Oyer and Terminer, and is much less inclined to listen to ghost stories, it still moves slowly, and food is running low. You hear that some prisoners are so emaciated, they barely resemble the people who entered months ago. It's around this time that Governor Phipps starts issuing pardons. In January of 1693, he orders the release of many remaining prisoners, on his own dime. Historians still argue whether this was a sincere act of redemption or a well-timed political move to save face. Maybe both. Phipps, after all, had greenlit the original court that carried out the executions. Now he's trying to put the devil back in the bottle, and maybe a little polish on his own name. One of the first to go home is Elizabeth Proctor. Remember her? She was pregnant when sentenced. The court spared her for the time being, because hanging a baby, even by Salem's standards, was too far. She gives birth in prison under fetid conditions, then is finally released with her infant in tow. Her husband, John Proctor, wasn't so lucky. His name was cleared, but not before he was hanged. Elizabeth now walks through the town with hollow eyes and a newborn clutched to her chest, a living monument to injustice. Other survivors try to rebuild their lives. Some move away. You can't blame them. Salem's soil feels cursed. You hear that in Andover and Ipswich, neighbors are beginning to reconcile quietly, sharing loaves of bread across property lines that once divided them like enemy trenches. There are even a few awkward apologies like, "Sorry I called you a witch and cheered for your hanging. Fancy some cider?" But most folks keep their regrets tucked behind closed lips. It's easier to pretend you weren't part of it. You, though, you keep remembering their faces. The way Rebecca Nurse stood so calmly in court, as if righteousness alone could save her. The way Giles Corey didn't scream. The way Mary Eastie's final letter pleaded for an end, not just for herself, but for others. That letter, in fact, has started to circulate. A copy ends up in Boston. It's a searing, graceful appeal from the scaffold, and you swear it leaves a burn mark on your soul when you read it. Then, a strange thing happens. A few people start to push for something entirely new. Justice. In 1697, 5 years after the hangings, the Massachusetts General Court declares a day of fasting and prayer. They call it a day of official humiliation. You attend. The pews creak beneath the weight of townspeople trying to swallow their guilt with every bite of stale bread and sips of bitter wine. You close your eyes and try to imagine what forgiveness might feel like. That same year, a judge named Samuel Sewall, the only one of the 9 judges to publicly apologize, stands during Sunday service and confesses his role in the trials. His voice shakes. You watch him bow his head, the silence around him full of those who won't admit what they also did. Sewall will spend the rest of his life in atonement, fasting and praying every January 14th in remembrance of the trials. It's something. Not enough, but something. Not everyone is as remorseful. William Stoughton, the Chief Justice of the Witch Court, never expresses regret. In fact, he goes on to become acting governor of Massachusetts. You wonder if he ever dreams of gallows in the night. Probably not. The powerful tend to sleep soundly. Meanwhile, petitions begin trickling into the court from survivors and family, members of the executed. They want their loved ones' names cleared. They want compensation. You hear that it takes decades for some of these appeals to be honored. Some never are. Here's a quirky tidbit. In 1706, one of the afflicted girls, Anne Putnam Jr., actually stands before her church and confesses that her accusations were false. She claims she was deceived by Satan. Not a bad strategy, blaming the Prince of Darkness. Works better than I was just a kid caught up in mass hysteria. But still, it's something. A public apology from one of the ringleaders. You hear she lived a quiet life after that. Never married. Maybe she couldn't bear to love someone after what she'd done. You notice a new generation beginning to rise. Children born after the hysteria. Teens who know of the trials only through hushed stories. They don't fear witches the way their parents did. They joke about it sometimes in that irreverent way only those safely removed from trauma can. You envy their distance, but even they can sense the scars left behind. Sometimes walking through Salem you pass the old execution site. There's no marker yet, no gravestone, just grass, wind, and memory. But you swear you feel something there. Not ghosts, not really. Just that peculiar heaviness of a place where too much went unsaid for too long. Salem is no longer burning with hysteria, but the embers still glow, soft and bitter beneath the surface. You try not to breathe them in too deeply, but on quiet nights they rise with the mist. You walk into the meeting house one blustery morning in early 1693, expecting another sermon of fire and brimstone, but what greets you instead is the unmistakable sense of something ending. Not quite. Closure, but that awkward silent pause after a very loud, very bad play. The Salem witch trials, which once consumed your town like a fever, are officially over. The court of Oyer and Terminer is gone. The gallows are empty. The jail doors are creaking open slowly as more of the accused trickle back into the world. But this is no victory parade. The mood is grim, uncertain. You might expect rejoicing, but what's there to celebrate when so much has been lost? The colony itself seems shaken. Governor Phipps, yes, the same man who allowed the madness to happen in the first place, tries to slam the brakes hard. He issues pardons. He scolds the use of spectral evidence. He even tries to shift the blame. You hear him say that the court was misled by unreliable testimony, like some kind of innocent bystander rather than the guy who built the platform for it. Still, he does something else that matters. He sends word to England, a full report. He knows the Crown is watching, and they're not pleased. In the background, Massachusetts is in a sticky legal situation. See, the original charter that gave the colony its legal footing was revoked back in 1684. For years now, the colony has been operating in a kind of legal limbo. It's no coincidence that in 1692, the very same year the witch trials exploded, the new royal charter finally arrived. The timing is almost poetic or maybe just cosmically ironic. Under this new charter, Massachusetts Bay becomes a royal colony with a royally appointed governor. That's Phipps. And while he was away fighting in Maine early in the crisis, things unraveled fast. When he returned and realized his judges had been executing citizens based on dreams and teenage tantrums, even he had to say, maybe not. Now, under pressure from England and local unrest, Phipps moves quickly. He disbands the special court, replaces it with a more standard one, the Superior Court of Judicature, and stacks it with judges who are skeptical of spectral evidence. You hear their first session barely convicts anyone. And those who confessed, most are pardoned. By the summer of 1693, the jails are nearly empty. The nightmare is over. Or is it? See, just because the hangings stop doesn't mean the consequences disappear. You overhear arguments at the market, someone accusing a neighbor of being still under Satan's influence. One man demands his old property back, saying it was stolen while he was imprisoned. Another refuses to speak to his sister, who testified against his wife. The trauma lingers in every crack of every beam in Salem. Then comes the long, awkward march toward accountability, at least the 17th century version of it. In 1697, the Massachusetts General Court declares a day of official humiliation, basically a government-sponsored "We're Sorry" prayer event. You're there. The sermon is thick with repentance. People weep. It's deeply uncomfortable but oddly cathartic. For once, the town seems united in something other than paranoia. You see Judge Samuel Sewall again. The same man who once sentenced people to death based on ghost stories now stands in front of the congregation and publicly confesses. He owns his role in the tragedy, begs for divine forgiveness, and pledges to fast every year in memory of the victims. It's raw. It's real. You almost believe him, but not everyone follows suit. Chief Justice William Stoughton, no apology, no remorse. He even refuses to annul the convictions. The man goes on to become acting governor. Talk about failing upward. You try to avoid looking him in the eye when he rides through town, mostly because you're afraid of what you might say. As for the victims' families, many begin petitioning the government. They want justice, or at the very least, their loved ones' names cleared. They want compensation for the property that was confiscated, for the years spent in jail, for the lives shattered. Some even sue their accusers. The court is flooded with these appeals, and slowly, painfully slowly, they get results. By 1711, yes, nearly 2 decades later, the colony finally passes a bill restoring the names of some of the wrongfully accused. They even offer modest financial compensation. It's a start. Not for everyone, though. Some victims aren't included. Historians still argue whether this was due to oversight, political maneuvering, or just cold, bureaucratic indifference. And then there are the quirky ripples of what follows. You hear of towns further inland whispering about how they might have been next. Communities once eager to accuse now double-lock their doors against outsiders. Ministers shift their sermons, now warning against overzealous judgment and the danger of Satan working through suspicion. Quite the pivot, considering half of them were cheerleading just a few years ago. One fringe theory even circulates that witches did exist, but it was all a test, and the colony failed. A test from God to see if they would uphold justice, and they blew it spectacularly. You overhear this in a tavern and try not to laugh into your cider. Somewhere between satire and tragedy, Salem begins to forget. Not deliberately, but gradually. The dead are buried. The courts move on. Children grow up never fully knowing what happened. That may be the cruelest part. And you? You still walk by Gallows Hill from time to time. It's quiet, overgrown, nothing marks it yet. But you can't shake the image of the scaffold, the way the wind sounded when the trapdoor fell, the silence after. Justice, it seems, is more than just pardons and compensation. It's remembering. By now your footsteps are quieter, more measured, as you walk through the village. The hysteria has burned itself out, but its smoke still lingers. Salem is a place of shadows now, and the townspeople carry those shadows inside them. They don't talk about the trials much, not directly, but you hear the names in lowered voices. Rebecca, Giles, Sarah, like ghosts that refuse to stay buried. It's 1693, and the Court of Oyer and Terminer is gone, replaced by the more moderate Superior Court of Judicature. The accused are no longer hanged based on spectral visions or petty village squabbles. Many of those still imprisoned are finally released. Some return home to nothing. No house, no livestock, no warm welcome. Others are luckier, greeted by family who kept their land, their name, and their compassion intact. You start noticing subtle changes in daily life. People hesitate before making accusations, before whispering suspicions. And when someone stumbles during a sermon or suffers a sudden illness, they blame it on the weather, or perhaps bad bread. Not witches. There's a kind of learned humility in the air now, a quiet acknowledgement that the truth got tangled somewhere back there on the gallows. But here's where it gets interesting, and a little bit heartbreaking. For years after the trials, the people of Salem don't just move on, they try to atone. It starts with quiet petitions. Families of the executed and the imprisoned approach the Massachusetts General Court, some tentatively, others with righteous fury. They demand justice, real justice. Names cleared, reputations restored, and some sort of reparation for the horror that unfolded. The legal process is agonizingly slow, weighed down by political red tape, personal guilt, and the sheer embarrassment of it all. In 1697, on January 14th, a public fast is declared across the colony, a day of official humiliation. It's not exactly a parade, but in Puritan New England, that's about as dramatic a display of remorse as it gets. You're there, bundled in your best wool, stomach rumbling as ministers recite long, apologetic prayers. No one names names, but everyone knows what it's about. The silence afterward is even heavier than the fasting. Judge Samuel Sewall stands during that service and makes a public confession. You remember him, tall, proud, always buttoned to the chin. He places a piece of paper in the minister's hand, a written apology, and asks for God's forgiveness. From then on, he fasts every January 14th for the rest of his life, a private penance that becomes a public symbol. It's a rare moment of accountability, but it's not contagious. Others never admit fault. William Stoughton, Chief Justice of the Court of Oyer and Terminer, refuses to apologize, refuses to recant. Instead, he continues climbing the political ladder. He serves as lieutenant governor, then acting governor. He dies in 1701 without ever acknowledging the blood on his hands. You hear people call him cold as granite, muttering not in a poetic way. Meanwhile, Those who suffered wait, and wait. It isn't until 1711, nearly 2 decades after the last hanging, that the colony finally passes a bill restoring the names of 22 convicted individuals and offering financial compensation to their heirs. 40 years after the trials, the last remaining conviction is vacated. It takes until 2001, yes, 2001, for the state of Massachusetts to formally clear all accused witches. Historians still argue whether the initial hesitation to include all names in the 1711 bill was due to politics, personal grudges, or a twisted sense of selective justice. Some families receive money, about £600 in total, divided among them. It's not much, not nearly enough to buy back what they lost. But you see it maybe as symbolic. A ledger slowly being balanced, a wound cautiously stitched shut. There's a quirky, almost unbelievable detail in the Proctor family's story. Elizabeth Proctor, who narrowly escaped execution due to pregnancy, ends up filing one of the most thorough and persistent petitions. She eventually wins back her family's confiscated estate. Her children live to see their father's name restored, though John Proctor never sees it himself. The irony? His descendants go on to become minor celebrities in the American Revolution and later U.S. politics. Talk about legacy. Other descendants are less eager to discuss their family trees. You meet people who claim to have witch trial bloodlines, but they say it in whispers or after a few drinks. Some lean into it, telling ghost stories or opening shops selling pewter pentagrams. Others avoid it like a curse. Ann Putnam Jr., remember her? One of the key accusers? In 1706, she does something that makes everyone stop and listen. She publicly confesses that her accusations were false. She says she was deluded by Satan and begs forgiveness from her church. She's the only one of the afflicted girls to do this. It's both admirable and profoundly tragic. She lives out her life quietly, never marries, and dies young. Some say she carried her guilt like a second skin. The town itself transforms in subtle ways, no longer defined by dread, but by memory. The meeting house where the first hearings occurred is eventually replaced. The jail is torn down, but the site of Gallows Hill, that lingers. At first, no one marks it. People avoid it, pretend not to know exactly where it is. But time has a way of polishing even the roughest stones. Decades pass. Tourists start to arrive. Yes, even then, people curious about the trials, drawn by morbid fascination. Writers take notes. Ministers craft sermons. And suddenly, the Salem witch trials aren't just a shameful local event. They're becoming part of American folklore. The cautionary tale begins to take shape. And you, standing at the edge of this shift, can feel the arc bending. From terror to tragedy, from silence to storytelling. The question now is, what will people learn? You wander through the quiet streets of Salem, and the silence feels heavy, almost reverent. It's as if the town is holding its breath. The trials have ended, the executions halted, and yet no one really knows how to go on. The damage has already been done. The air is thick with shame, and the ghosts, both real and imagined, seem to linger in doorways and behind drawn curtains. The year is now 1693, and while the hysteria has finally been reined in, the village doesn't snap back to normal like an elastic band. Instead, life resumes in awkward, staggered steps. Some of the jailed have been released. Others remain locked away, not due to guilt, but because they can't afford the steep jail fees required for their release. Yes, that was a thing. You're accused, jailed for months, and then charged room and board like you've been staying at the Colonial Hilton. Sleep well, inmate. You pass by Salem's meeting house and see Reverend Samuel Parris trying to maintain his composure. Once a central authority during the trials, Parris now finds himself deeply unpopular. His fire and brimstone sermons once fueled the panic, but now with the hysteria behind them, many in the congregation want him gone. Some accuse him of inciting it all. Others think he just got carried away. Historians still argue whether he was a true believer or a manipulative opportunist, but what's clear is that the community has turned on him. You cross paths with one of the afflicted girls. Maybe it's Ann Putnam Jr., walking slowly with her head down. Her family was one of the most involved in the accusations. Her voice one of the most insistent. Now she keeps to herself. The town doesn't look at her the same way anymore. The spell is broken. And when you ask someone about her, they just sigh and say, "Poor girl, what a terrible thing we all lived through." For the families of the executed, grief has no ceremony. No gravestones mark the victims' resting places. They were denied proper burials, their bodies discarded in shallow, unmarked graves. The stigma of witchcraft clings to their memory like smoke. Some families, fearful of being tainted by association, try to keep their mourning private. Others fight quietly for dignity to be returned to their loved ones' names. You visit the home of Sarah Good's family, what's left of it. Her small daughter Dorcas was also imprisoned during the trials. A child, shackled and accused. Dorcas was traumatized, never quite the same. The aftershocks ripple through generations. It's the sort of wound that doesn't heal neatly. It just stops bleeding in public. You notice something else as you walk. There are gaps in the town's rhythm. Fields lie fallow. Shops are shut. Children play less loudly or not at all. It's like everyone is speaking in whispers, hoping not to summon the madness again. The executions, the arrests, the terror. It's all still too recent. Families were divided. Friendships shattered. Trust bled out of the community like ink on a wet page. And then there are those who profited from the panic. A few, like the constables who collected fees for each arrest, quietly count their coins. But even they can't spend guilt away. No one escaped unscathed. Even the accusers, once feared, now find themselves treated with suspicion. It's awkward, you know? One minute you're pointing fingers, the next you're being avoided at the market like bad meat. Governor William Phipps, who had disbanded the Court of Oyer and Terminer and put a stop to the trials, tries to rebuild political trust. He authorizes a new court, one that no longer accepts spectral evidence. It's not perfect, but it's a shift. A recognition, perhaps, that reason needs a seat at the table again. Though privately, many suspect he acted only once his own wife was named. There's a subtle irony to how it all winds down. The very people who orchestrated or enabled the witch hunt now want to erase it. They stop talking about it, they change the subject. They refocus on trade, on farming, on rebuilding homes and families. But Salem never forgets. Not really. You can't have 20 innocent people killed and dozens more imprisoned without that carving itself into your collective soul. Some small signs of reckoning begin to appear. A few apologies are whispered. One judge, Samuel Sewall, publicly repents. In church, in front of everyone. He stands up, head bowed, and confesses his role in the madness. A rare act of conscience in a time when most just want to sweep everything under the nearest Puritan rug. You almost feel for him. Standing there in that pew, sweating bullets and praying forgiveness finds him before the next Sunday sermon. Yet the healing is slow, painfully slow. It doesn't help that there are still debts to be paid. Literally, families of the executed must fight to reclaim property that was confiscated during the trials. In many cases, it's a legal nightmare. Some land is gone forever. Some names are never cleared. The colonial government doesn't move quickly or generously. Still, whispers begin to give way to tentative conversations. The nightmare is over, but not yet understood. And like waking up from any truly dark dream, you can't help but lie there blinking, wondering how it all happened, and whether it could happen again. As the year draws to a close, Salem is quieter, but not calmer. The snow falls early, blanketing the town like a shroud. Maybe it's fitting. The fresh layer hides the scars, but you still know they're there, just beneath the surface. You find yourself in the early years of the 1700s now, and Salem is still trying to stitch itself back together. The air feels different, less charged, more tentative, like a house after a long, loud argument. Everyone is still home, but no one quite knows what to say next. The apologies begin slowly, like hesitant drips from a leaky roof. They're not grand speeches, not banner-waving parades of remorse. They're more like mumbled confessions, offered in pews and town meetings, sometimes even at kitchen tables with tears and trembling hands. Reverend Paris, whose fire lit much of the original blaze, finally offers a reluctant apology. He doesn't exactly fall on his sword. He kind of leans on it awkwardly and says, "Mistakes were made." The congregation isn't impressed. By 1697, he's asked to step down, and he does, quietly, with his head lowered, perhaps wondering how much of the guilt he truly deserves to carry. Historians still argue whether he was sincere in his regret, or just saving face. Others are braver. That same year, Judge Samuel Sewall delivers a public confession in Boston. You can almost hear the silence in the meeting house as he stands, trembling slightly, and reads a statement asking God to forgive him for his role in the trials. He even declares a day of prayer and fasting, voluntarily. That's commitment in Puritan terms. It's one of the first signs that at least someone is willing to own up to the disaster and try to heal the breach. But the pain runs deep. You See it in the eyes of survivors, those who were jailed for months on end, starved, chained, humiliated, only to be quietly released when the mood shifted. No apology comes quickly enough to erase that kind of trauma. Some, like Elizabeth Proctor, wife of the executed John Proctor, fight for years to have their names cleared and property restored. Elizabeth herself was convicted, sentenced to hang, and only spared because she was pregnant. Her reprieve wasn't an act of mercy, it was procedural. The court didn't want to be responsible for executing a fetus. Once her child was born, they kind of forgot about her, just left her in jail. She had to petition for her release. And then there's Ann Putnam Jr., remember her? The girl whose accusations helped kick off the whole frenzy. In 1706, she walks into the Salem village church, stands before the congregation, and confesses. She says her actions were not malicious, but she was deluded by Satan. It's a formal apology, but it's real. You get the sense that it costs her something, maybe more than anyone will ever know. She never marries. She spends most of her life caring for her siblings and her ailing parents. Her life, in a strange way, becomes its own penance. The Massachusetts General Court, likely feeling the pressure from all sides, begins to take some official action. They reverse several of the convictions, though not all. They're oddly selective, at first like they're testing the waters. It's not until 1711, almost 2 decades later, that the colony passes a bill that grants restitution to the victim's heirs. The compensation varies. Some families receive $20, others get more. But can you really put a price on an innocent life lost to paranoia? You visit one of the surviving victims as they receive the news. They sit quietly in their home, the parchment in hand, eyes scanning the formal language. There's no joy on their face. Maybe a flicker of relief, but mostly exhaustion. The letter doesn't undo the nights spent in chains or the terror of waiting for the gallows. But it's something, a faint acknowledgement from the world that what happened wasn't just bad, it was wrong. Even the courts start to evolve. The hysteria teaches colonial authorities an embarrassing but critical lesson. Due process matters. Spectral evidence. Remember that charming idea where dreams and invisible spirits counted as testimony is permanently tossed out. Legal minds begin to emphasize the need for hard evidence, for real proof, and for the presumption of innocence. It's a pivot toward modern jurisprudence, born from an absolute failure of justice. So in a strange way, the victims help shape a better future, not by choice, but by consequence. Church leaders, too, begin to recalibrate. The theocracy that once ruled with an iron Bible finds itself on shakier ground. The power of ministers to influence court decisions diminishes. Some say the trials mark the beginning of the end for Puritan dominance in New England. You wouldn't exactly call it a rebellion, but there's definitely a slow spreading skepticism in the air. Faith is still strong, but it's no longer blind. What's quirky, and somehow fitting, is how some of the key players vanish from the spotlight. Paris disappears into obscurity, moving from parish to parish. Abigail Williams, one of the first accusers, leaves Salem entirely. No one really knows what happened to her. She just fades into history, like a shadow after dusk. And if that doesn't give you goosebumps, you might be braver than you thought. As you meander through the village one last time, you see signs of rebuilding. The gallows is gone. The jail is quiet. Crops grow again. Children laugh again, though more softly than before. A tentative hope creeps back in like grass poking through scorched earth. But memory sticks. The people of Salem carry the past not on their sleeves but in their silences, their glances, the long pauses in conversation. It's no longer about fear of witches. It's about fear of what people are capable of when they stop questioning the fire they're feeding. You tuck that thought away as the sky darkens above the village. A few stars twinkle in the night. It's peaceful, but beneath the peace is a warning, etched into every home, every field, every unmarked grave. You wake to the rustle of parchment and the scratch of quills, because now, Salem is under scholarly dissection. The trials are over, the apologies have trickled in, but the why still clings like smoke to a wool coat. And so the world begins to ask, how did this happen? How did a group of educated, God-fearing colonists go full witch hunt with a side of gallows? Historians, sociologists, and your odd, eccentric uncle with a conspiracy podcast have been trying to answer that for centuries. You step into this tangled web of theories and interpretations, and it feels like standing in the center of a spinning mobile. every idea swaying wildly, each one just plausible enough to lean toward. Let's start with the crowd pleaser. Mass hysteria. The theory goes that the intense religious repression, combined with harsh living conditions and constant fear of external threats, Native American attacks, famine, disease, created a psychological pressure cooker. When the young girls started showing strange symptoms, convulsions, screaming, hallucinations, it spread like a contagion. People weren't just frightened, they were already primed to believe in supernatural causes. So when someone cried, "Witch!" everyone jumped. Now toss in ergot poisoning, yes, the fungus. One quirky theory suggests that the rye crops in Salem may have been contaminated with ergot, a hallucinogenic fungus known to cause seizures, paranoia, and yes, some truly weird visions. It's the same substance that later gave us LSD, so you can imagine what a slice of bewitched bread might do to your worldview. Historians still argue whether this theory holds weight or if it's just a psychedelic footnote. Then there's the socio-political angle. Salem wasn't just spiritually anxious, it was deeply divided. The town of Salem Village, now Danvers, was in a constant power struggle with the wealthier, more established Salem town. Add to that land disputes, inheritance drama, and resentment between neighbors, and you've got the perfect storm for some old-fashioned vengeance. Accusations weren't always random. They often flowed along family feuds and property lines. And let's not ignore the gender dynamic. Most of the accused were women. Not just any women, but many who were outspoken, unmarried, or otherwise inconvenient. In a society where stepping out of line was both socially and spiritually dangerous, calling someone a witch was a convenient way to put them back in their place, or 6 feet under. Some historians argue that the trials were a brutal expression of misogyny cloaked in religious language. You peek into one particular theory room, and it's filled with whispers about economic motivations. Remember how the property of convicted witches was often seized? That means people stood to gain from others being convicted. It raises the uncomfortable idea that some accusations may have had more to do with greed than genuine belief. Not exactly. The spiritual revival they preached from the pulpit. Of course, the theological backdrop can't be ignored. Puritanism taught that Satan was real, active, and always looking for new agents. They believed the devil could enter a person's soul and work mischief through them, sometimes without that person even knowing. It sounds bonkers now, but to them, it was Sunday School 101. They saw witchcraft not just as a crime, but as a form of high treason against God himself. In that context, hanging someone wasn't cruel, it was protective. Then there's confirmation bias, centuries before anyone gave it a name. Once a few people were accused and confessed, every cough, every bad dream, every failed crop was seen as proof. The court system, especially under the infamous Court of Oyer and Terminer, didn't exactly demand rigorous standards. Spectral evidence was accepted, meaning if someone claimed they saw your spirit pinching them in a dream, that was as good as physical evidence. You'd think due process would raise an eyebrow at that, but nope. At the time, it raised a gallows. Even geography plays a weird role. One study suggested that the majority of accusers lived on the western side of Salem Village, while most of the accused came from the east. That's not random. That's a pattern. Historians debate what it means. Class, struggle, religious factions, witchcraft blowing in on a specific breeze. Okay, maybe not that last one. But the point is, this wasn't just moral panic. It had contours. It had structure. You sit with all these theories, letting them swirl around you like leaves in the wind. None of them explain everything, but together they begin to paint a fuller picture, not just of what happened in Salem, but how fragile society becomes when fear is in the driver's seat. And perhaps the most haunting debate isn't about ergot or Puritanism. It's about the girls themselves. Were they faking, deluded, manipulated by adults, seeking attention? Or were they victims too, caught in a world where women, especially young ones, had almost no voice unless it was trembling in fear or accusing someone else? The truth, as usual, probably lives somewhere in the gray zone. Maybe they started pretending and came to believe it themselves. Maybe the trauma was real and the explanations were just bad. Maybe it was a perfect storm of stress, suggestion, and suppression. Step outside the study hall of these historians, the sun dipping low over Salem once more. You now know what they argue, what they suspect, and what they'll probably debate until the end of time. But the real lesson? When a society stops questioning, when it fears the strange more than it loves the truth, this is where it ends up. Not in hell, but in a courtroom, with shackles and ropes. You drift now into quieter, more candlelit rooms, places where the Salem witch trials don't end but echo, retold and reshaped in ink, on stages, in novels and school books. Salem has become more than a location. It's a literary myth, a cultural warning siren, a grim fairy tale Americans tell themselves about what happens when fear devours reason. Your first stop, Nathaniel Hawthorne, born in Salem in 1804. He's got that brooding, tortured artist vibe and a heavy ancestral shadow on his back. One of his ancestors was Judge John Hathorne, one of the most zealous interrogators during the trials. Never apologized, never repented. Nathaniel adds a W to the family name, Hawthorne, as if trying to disguise the bloodline. He's haunted by the past, and you see it in his writing. Guilt, sin, repression, hypocrisy. It all drips through his Gothic classics like The Scarlet Letter and Young Goodman Brown, where witches lurk in forests and Puritans hide secrets behind starched collars. He's not telling stories about the Salem trials. He's telling stories shaped by them. His characters carry the emotional fallout, the legacy of judgment and shame. That courtroom might be gone, but it still echoes in every whispered line of Hawthorne's prose. Jump ahead to the 20th century, and things get very on the nose. Enter Arthur Miller and his 1953 play, The Crucible. If Hawthorne wrote in haunted metaphors, Miller walks right up to the witch trials and grabs them by the collar. The Crucible is a fictionalized account of the Salem events, but it's really a giant allegory for something modern, McCarthyism. In the 1950s, during the Red Scare, Americans were accusing each other of being communists with as much frenzy and as little proof as Salem villagers accused witches. Miller was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee himself, so the sting was personal. Through the character of John Proctor, a good man destroyed by lies and moral cowardice, Miller gives us a version of Salem that's less about cauldrons and curses and more about mass paranoia, public shaming, and moral spine. It's been taught in high schools ever since, where teenagers either fall deeply into its message or quietly use it as nap fuel. Still, it endures. And here's a little literary oddity. Marion Starkey, a historian, writes The Devil in Massachusetts in 1949. It's not fiction, but it reads like a novel, dramatic, intimate, vividly imagined. Starkey believes that to understand Salem, you have to feel it. She blends fact with emotion, creating one of the earliest works to explore Salem not just as an event, but as a psychological phenomenon. Her work inspires Arthur Miller directly. You could say Starkey was the witchy godmother of the Crucible. From there, Salem seeps into every corner of culture. Witches show up in cartoons, horror films, Halloween decorations, sitcoms. You've got Bewitched in the 1960s. Yes, the nose-twitching suburban housewife who's secretly magical. One episode actually features a statue of Samantha being placed in modern-day Salem, where she defends real witches and laments the injustice of the trials. Light-hearted, sure, but the message lands. Then comes Hocus Pocus in the 90s, where witches are campy, funny, and fashion-forward, sucking the souls out of children with style. It's a far cry from the Puritan nooses, but it reflects how deeply Salem has sunk into the American imagination. So deep we turn tragedy into Halloween fun without batting an eye. Historians still argue whether this pop-cultural recycling trivializes the real suffering or keeps the memory alive. In books, too, Salem becomes a backdrop and a metaphor. Celia Reese's Witch Child dives into the era through the eyes of a young girl accused. More recently, Stacy Schiff's The Witches' Salem, 1692, brings scholarly gravitas to the chaos. Dense, detailed, and unflinching. These works keep poking at the bones, asking not just what happened, but why we keep coming back to it. Because, let's be real, you don't turn the Salem witch trials into memes, movies, plays, and podcasts unless something in them speaks to something ongoing. We're still Saleming, just with Wi-Fi. Some portrayals lean into feminist reclamation. Instead of witches as villains, they're reimagined as women who were too free, too wise, too much. You see this in fiction, where witch becomes shorthand for empowered womanhood, spiritual rebellion, or misunderstood genius. The pendulum swings, and suddenly the gallows feel less like a punishment and more like a warning sign. Don't stand out. Even music gets in on it. Folk bands sing mournful ballads about Salem. Metal groups scream it. Pop artists sample it. It's like everyone's taking a turn stirring the cauldron. And in all of it, whether it's Miller's sharp political parable or a Halloween-themed episode of your favorite sitcom, the story never really ends. The trials are over, but the ideas, the fears, the questions, they never go to sleep. You lean back, eyes half closed, as the ink of 1,000 Salem stories continues to dry. All these storytellers, scholars, and showrunners, they're just trying to understand what really happened. Or maybe they're trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. Because at the heart of all this retelling is a single, chilling truth. When fear takes the wheel, history doesn't just repeat. It dresses up in different clothes and comes knocking again. You shuffle your feet through cobbled streets now paved smooth by time, but something still lingers in the air. Not fear exactly, not sorrow. It's something else. A curiosity, a commercialization, maybe even a reclaiming. You're in modern-day Salem, a place that has transformed its darkest moment into its entire identity. Welcome to the town where witches are everywhere, and no one's getting hanged for it anymore. The fog curls around your ankles as you walk through town, past bookstores with pentagram displays, palm readers offering $10 fortunes, and black cats lounging like minor celebrities. Salem has leaned hard into its witchy reputation. You half expect the parking meters to take payment in frog legs and powdered bat wings. But beneath the kitsch, there's real depth. There's history here, and Salem knows it. First stop, the Roa Salem Witch Museum. It's housed in a Gothic former church which already sets the tone. Inside, you step into a darkened chamber where wax figures act out the trials with dramatic lighting and a spooky voiceover that might remind you of Halloween Horror Nights, but then hits you with historical facts so sobering it feels like emotional whiplash. A spotlight falls on a girl writhing in imaginary torment. The voice explains how spectral evidence was accepted in court. You feel the pit open in your stomach all over again. Just down the street is the Witch House, the only remaining structure in Salem with direct ties to the trials. It was home to Judge Jonathan Corwin. You creep inside and everything creaks. Floorboards, door hinges, your resolve. You study 17th century medical instruments that look more like medieval torture devices and read diary excerpts from the period. This house isn't trying to entertain you, it's trying to remind you. Then you see the tourists. So many tourists. They pour in every October, turning Salem into a carnival of capes, cauldrons, and selfies in front of bewitched signage. There are ghost tours, psychic fairs, candlelit graveyard walks. It's part history, part spectacle. Some locals lean into it, others roll their eyes behind their broomstick merch booths. A lot of it started in the 1970s, when interest in the occult and feminism sparked a rebranding of witches from evil hags to misunderstood healers and rebels. The town began to embrace the image rather than hide from it. The annual Haunted Happenings Festival kicked off in 1982. Since then, it's ballooned into a month-long Halloween mega event, complete with parades, concerts, and a general sense that if you're not wearing black and carrying crystals, you're underdressed. But here's the twist. There's a genuine Wiccan and pagan community in Salem. Real modern witches live here, practice here, and run shops filled with herbs, tarot decks, and moon calendars. For them, Salem isn't just about history or marketing. It's about healing, taking a place of trauma and turning it into sacred ground. They host rituals on the anniversaries of executions. They leave offerings near the memorials. Some even consider their presence a form of spiritual restitution for those wrongfully killed centuries ago. And speaking of restitution, you find yourself at the Salem Witch Trials Memorial, nestled in a quiet corner of the town shaded by trees. It's modest. Stone benches engraved with the names of the executed, their final words etched beside them. You sit there a moment, reading phrases like, "I am innocent and God knows I am." They feel like whispers from a colder time. You can't help but notice how close the memorial is to a bustling strip of restaurants and shops. It's a strange juxtaposition, tragedy framed by tourism. But maybe that's Salem's real magic. Trick. It balances remembrance and reinvention like a broom on a tightrope. Of course, not everyone agrees on how well that balance works. Some historians and descendants of the accused have criticized the commercialization of the trials. Is it really respectful to sell witch hats and Hex Your Ex candles a block from where people were wrongfully executed? Or is it a sign that the town has reclaimed its story? Historians still argue whether this modern Salem honors its past or buries it beneath glitter and fog machines. But walk its streets long enough, and you'll see the answer is complicated. There are teenagers here, on class trips furiously scribbling notes. couples taking goofy selfies with green-faced mannequins. And then there are quiet visitors tracing their fingers over gravestones, lips moving in silent prayers. Salem has become all these things: theme park, pilgrimage site, and cautionary tale in equal parts. You overhear someone ask a tour guide, why did they do it? The guide shrugs, then says, fear, mostly, that, and power. And you realize that answer still works today, because while Salem looks different now, its story remains chillingly relevant. We're still navigating fear, suspicion, and scapegoating, just with newer villains and faster hashtags. Salem isn't ancient history, it's a mirror, and depending on the day, we either laugh at our reflection or flinch from it. You walk past a bookstore where the Crucible is shelved next to spell books and memoirs from modern witches, past a bakery selling hocus-pocus-themed cookies, past an old brick wall with ivy growing in the shape of a noose. Salem is strange like that, equal parts campy and haunted, performative and profound. And as the town fades behind you, the message is clear. The trials are over, but the questions they raised still crackle in the air. What do we do when fear outweighs truth? When justice bows to panic? When difference becomes danger? Salem has no easy answers, just a long memory and a wicked sense of timing. You walk slowly now, as if the air has thickened with the weight of centuries. The breeze carries echoes, some real, some imagined, whispers of rope stretching, and cries swallowed by a Puritan wind. But you're not in 1692 anymore. You're somewhere more reflective, a liminal space where the Salem witch trials aren't just tragic stories, but cautionary tales burned into the blueprint of American justice. Tonight, you're thinking about lessons. First, you hear the most obvious one, practically shouted by history teachers since the dawn of social studies class. Beware mass hysteria. That's the surface-level takeaway, right? People got scared. Scared people made poor decisions. Poor decisions led to innocent people being hanged. Simple cause and effect. But you know it's never that simple, don't you? In Salem, fear was a shapeshifter. It started as whispers of dark magic, then mutated into social pressure, political tension, and a dangerous stew of religious extremism. You might say it wore a Puritan bonnet, but let's be honest. Fear has many outfits, and it keeps updating its wardrobe. You see it. Even now, every so often, society falls under a new spell. Whether it's communism in the 1950s, terrorism in the 2000s, or misinformation in your newsfeed right now. Historians still argue whether the Salem trials were more about actual fear of witches or a convenient excuse to settle old grudges. That's the thing. Panic often finds useful allies in personal vendettas. Take Ann Putnam Jr., for example. She was one of the most prolific accusers in Salem, testifying against 62 people. Years later, she publicly apologized, claiming the devil had deceived her. Maybe he had, or maybe she just rode a wave of attention and influence until it crashed. Either way, her story reminds you how easy it is to get swept up in something bigger than yourself and only see clearly after the damage is done. Another lesson hums beneath the surface. Don't confuse authority with righteousness. The Salem judges were learned men, educated, respected, confident. They built gallows not because they were evil, but because they thought they were right. That's a spine chiller, isn't it? The idea that people can be sincere, and sincerely, wrong. Judge Samuel Sewall, to his credit, publicly confessed and repented for his role in the trials. He stood in front of his church congregation in 1697, asking for forgiveness with tears in his eyes. It was a rare thing, a man admitting he had been deeply, dangerously mistaken. You can almost hear the creak of the wooden pews as people sat, stunned. Maybe some were thinking it's about time. Maybe others were remembering their lost friends. Here's another gem from Salem's dark trove. Hysteria thrives where transparency dies. The Court of Oyer and Terminer operated in a bubble, without formal defense attorneys or appeals. Spectral evidence, ghost stories essentially, was taken as gospel. You try not to snort too loudly, but it's hard not to roll your eyes when you hear that someone was condemned because of a vision someone else claimed to have during a nap. It sounds absurd now, but then again, your modern world has its own versions of spectral evidence. Digitally amplified rumors, doctored images, half-truths shouted louder than full ones. Witch hunts don't always need pitchforks and bonfires. Sometimes they just need a comment section. That's why legal reform eventually followed Salem's debacle. You quietly thank the ghost of William Stoughton, the Chief Justice of the trials, for indirectly pushing America toward a stronger emphasis on legal rights, even though he never apologized. Today's concept of innocent until proven guilty feels almost like a rebellion against what happened in Salem, and maybe it is. By the time the 18th century rolled around, colonial courts were much warier of witchcraft charges. The Salem episode had become the textbook definition of a legal catastrophe. You picture future lawyers studying it by candlelight in dusty libraries, shaking their heads at the idea of accepting spectral cats and invisible pinch marks as courtroom evidence. But there's a more personal takeaway too, one that doesn't involve gavels or governments. It's this: think for yourself. So many in Salem simply followed the crowd. Some out of fear, some out of pressure, others maybe out of sheer boredom. The few who dared to say, "Wait, this doesn't make sense," often found themselves next in line for the noose. John Proctor did it. He questioned the trials, spoke up for reason, and died for it. Reverend George Burroughs recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly on the gallows, something a witch supposedly couldn't do. It should have been enough to save him, but it wasn't. Logic drowned in fear that day. That's the whispering lesson beneath it all. Don't let fear shout down your better judgment. Don't surrender your spine just because the crowd has lost theirs. Because when the stakes are highest, when everyone is clamoring for certainty, your quiet, thoughtful voice might be the only thing holding the line between justice and madness. Now, if you're wondering whether we, as a society, really learned all this, well, the answer is complicated. Historians still argue whether Salem fundamentally changed anything, or if it was just a bump in a longer, bumpier road. Some point out that similar witch hunts continued in Europe for decades after. Others highlight how Salem became a kind of warning light blinking never again through the fog of American legal development. But let's not forget the fringe detail that makes you smile in spite of yourself. Massachusetts didn't formally declare the accused innocent until 2001. That's right, 2001. Nearly 310 years after the trials, the state said, "Oops." You imagine Bridget Bishop somewhere in the afterlife, rolling her spectral eyes and muttering, "Took you long enough." As your thoughts drift, you realize that perhaps the most important lesson from Salem isn't about witches at all. It's about humans. Fragile, fearful, hopeful, vengeful, and all too willing to believe what suits them. And just maybe, that's the scariest part of the whole story. You shift on your pillow, the cotton cool beneath your cheek, and the air still, humming with the eerie echoes of Salem. But your thoughts now reach beyond that small New England village. Beyond Massachusetts, beyond 1692, you begin to trace the crooked path of witch hunts across the globe, like a constellation of fear lighting up different corners of history. Turns out, Salem wasn't the first, or the worst. Let's jump continents. For a second, you're now in Europe long before Salem's Puritans ever set foot on American soil. The European witch craze scorched its way across the 15th to 17th centuries. Countries like Germany, Switzerland, and Scotland really outdid themselves. Germany alone executed over 25,000 people during their witch trials. Suddenly, Salem's 20s. Hangings feel like the prequel. And the methods? Let's just say you're lucky to be lying in bed and not tied to a dunking stool. In England and Scotland, water tests were all the rage. If you floated, you were guilty. If you sank, well, good news, you were innocent. Bad news, you'd probably drowned. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were seen as divine judgment or just a twisted form of entertainment for superstitious crowds. Now, slide over to Africa. Even in the modern day, witchcraft accusations continue to wreck lives, particularly in places like Nigeria and Ghana. You hear about children being abandoned or worse, all in the name of ridding communities of evil. There's no Oyer and Terminer court, but the fear and punishment are just as real. And that tells you something pretty sobering. Humanity still hasn't entirely outgrown its love affair with scapegoats. In Papua New Guinea, accusations of Sanguma sorcery still lead to public executions. Sometimes these accusations are tied to sudden deaths, crop failures, or even bad dreams. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Maybe not so different from Betty Paris and Abigail Williams twitching on the floor and everyone jumping to the worst possible. Conclusion. Back to Europe again, specifically the Würzburg and Bamberg trials of 1626-1631. You want horrifying? These German trials included children, clergy, and even mayors. At one point, an entire city council was executed. Witch hunting didn't discriminate. If anything, it loved irony. Powerful people fell just as fast as powerless ones. The line between hunter and hunted was paper thin, And then there's the curious case of the Basque witch trials in Spain. Spain, interestingly, was less bloodthirsty than its neighbors. The Spanish Inquisition, yes, that one, actually concluded that most accusations were nonsense. One inquisitor even declared there were neither witches nor bewitched until they were talked and written about. You nod slowly, impressed. That's oddly enlightened, especially coming from a group not exactly known for its chill. You start to notice a pattern. No matter the culture, century, or continent, witch hunts pop up when fear meets uncertainty. Crop failures, illness, war, or social upheaval. Boom. Suspicion ignites. Add a little religious rigidity or political ambition, and you've got yourself a bonfire. Even ancient Rome couldn't resist the allure. Way back in 186 BCE, the Senate cracked down on the Bacchanalia cult, accusing them of witchcraft and sedition. Thousands were reportedly executed or imprisoned. Apparently, witches have always been a convenient other, a blank canvas for society's nightmares. But let's bring it home again. Fast forward to the 1950s, and you land squarely in the middle of the Red Scare. Joseph McCarthy's anti-communist crusade in the U.S. Senate is often called a modern witch hunt, and for good reason. Careers ruined, reputations shredded, families torn apart, all because someone whispered, "I think they might be a communist." Sound familiar? Arthur Miller thought so too. He wrote The Crucible as an allegory for McCarthyism, mapping Salem's hysteria onto Washington, D.C. Even though the subject was 17th century witch trials, Miller knew that human fear doesn't really evolve. It just changes costumes. And that brings you to the heart of the lesson. Witch hunts are never really about witches. They're about control, about drawing invisible lines between us and them, about giving fear a face so we can strike at it, even if it means hitting the wrong target. There's a quirky case from Finland in the late 1600s you might like. There, most of the accused witches were men. Yep, you heard right. Finland flipped the script. Scholars still debate why. Some say it had to do with shamanic traditions. Others point to regional politics. But either way, it challenges your assumptions. Turns out anyone, regardless of gender, can find themselves at the pointy end of a superstition. You yawn as the comparisons stack up. France, India, Tanzania, even the U.S. military, witch hunts of all forms, still show up in courtrooms, corporate offices, and social media threads. Hashtag mobs and cancel culture. Let's not pretend those aren't their own flavor of frenzy. But here's a hopeful twist to lull you towards sleep. With each new witch hunt, the public catches on just a bit faster. The trials get exposed more quickly. The doubts are louder. Maybe that's the real legacy of Salem, giving people a dark enough mirror to recognize when history starts to repeat itself. Still, you can't help but wonder, how many modern witch hunts are you living through right now? How many lies are whispering their way through your world, wearing just enough truth to slip by unnoticed? You think about that, but only for a moment. After all, this is bedtime. The ghosts can wait. You're somewhere between dreaming and remembering now, nestled in the folds of your blanket, as the narrative of Salem begins winding toward its conclusion. But even as the executions end and the hysteria cools, the ripples haven't stopped spreading. The Salem witch trials, compressed into a feverish year, didn't just vanish. They seeped into the foundation of American identity. You're starting to see it clearly now. Salem wasn't just a small Puritan town with big problems. It became a symbol, a cultural myth, an eternal caution sign flickering in the back of the nation's mind. The trials became more than history. They became legacy. Legacies are tricky, though. They don't always say what we want them to. They evolve with time, often revealing more about us than about the people we're remembering. Salem's legacy starts with the legal system. You've probably heard the phrase innocent until proven guilty. And yes, you should absolutely thank the mess of 1692 for helping to nudge that principle into American jurisprudence. The travesty of those trials, no legal counsel, hearsay, as evidence, spectral accusations, forced future generations to ask, how do we make sure this never happens again? The answer came in bits and pieces. The U.S. Constitution, ratified in 1788, introduced the Sixth Amendment, the right to a fair trial, legal counsel, and witnesses. You can practically see the shadow of Giles Corey crushed beneath those clauses, whispering more weight, not just to the stones, but to justice itself. Even more specifically, legal scholars still refer to Salem when teaching how not to run a trial. The very term witch hunt now carries a legal weight, a red flag to courts and juries that emotion must never override due process. But that's just the beginning. Salem wove itself into the American imagination, quietly, like ivy through old wood. Let's talk about culture for a moment. You can't open a high school literature book without tripping over The Crucible, Arthur Miller's play that yanked Salem out of the dusty past and flung it into the 1950s spotlight. The characters are fictionalized, sure, but the bones of the story remain. Abigail with her dangerous flirtation with power, Proctor the flawed hero, the court teetering between righteousness and absurdity. Miller wrote it during the height of McCarthyism, when fear had once again become a political tool. What's wild is how easily the story transferred. Just swap witch for communist, and bam, same script, different century. Fear doesn't age, apparently. It just changes its hashtag. You can trace that legacy even further into pop culture. From Halloween decorations to horror films, witches remain a potent symbol. Sometimes sinister, sometimes whimsical, always mysterious. And at the root of many of those portrayals, Salem. The trials turned a grim piece of history into a pop mythology. The Salem witch became a brand, a cautionary tale, a Halloween costume, even a feminist icon in some circles. You grin as you recall that in the 1990s, Sabrina the Teenage Witch lived in fictional Salem, Massachusetts. Coincidence? Not quite. There's something enduring about the town's name, like a spell woven into the American psyche. But here's something not everyone knows. In 1957, Massachusetts passed a resolution formally apologizing for the trials, and yet they didn't officially exonerate all the victims until October 2022. That's right. Over 330 years later, Elizabeth Johnson Jr., the last accused woman who had not been formally cleared, finally had her name restored. Why so long? Historians still argue whether the delay was due to bureaucratic inertia, public apathy, or a sense that the damage had already been done. Either way, it speaks volumes about how legacies can linger unfinished, like a chapter left open for centuries. And here's the strange twist: the trials didn't make Salem crumble. In some ways, they made it famous. Modern-day Salem leans into its past with a curious mix of reverence and kitsch. There are witch museums, haunted walking tours, psychic parlors, and yes, an entire month-long celebration of Halloween. Over 1 million visitors pour in every October, eager to stand where the gallows once loomed or take selfies with witch statues. Some locals embrace it. Others find it uncomfortable, like dancing on a grave. You can imagine the ghost of Sarah Good watching tourists snap photos whispering, "This is what you did with my death?" The tension between remembrance and tourism is real. One historian called it America's most misunderstood historical site turned spiritual Disneyland. And he's not entirely wrong, but maybe that's part of the legacy too. How we balance honoring the dead with feeding the curiosity of the living. Salem has become a metaphor. In courtrooms, witch hunt means unchecked persecution. In pop culture, it symbolizes misunderstood power, and in social movements, it reminds us how quickly fear can be weaponized. You realize as you lie there that the trials planted a seed of skepticism into the American mind, a necessary doubt about authority, a question mark that refuses to go away. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it's lasted. Because as long as fear exists, so too does the risk of another Salem. And as long as Salem exists in memory, so too does the whisper, "Be careful, it could happen again." You're drifting now, heavier in your limbs, the weight of history gently pressing against you like a thick wool blanket. But you've made it to the final stretch. The story has been told, the names remembered, and the damage laid bare. Still, there's one last thing to do. One last breath to draw in the quiet shadow of Salem. It's time to lay them to rest. You return once more to the village, no longer buzzing with fear or judgment. The gallows are gone. The shouting crowds have long since silenced. What remains is stillness, and the memory of 20 souls. Their names are known: Bridget Bishop, Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Martha Carrier, George Burroughs, Giles Corey, and others, just as real, just as lost. Each with a story, a life, a voice that was taken in the smoke of hysteria. The wind still passes over Salem's old graveyards, over stones carved with names or left blank because some were buried in secret, their bodies denied proper burial. You walk there now, not literally, of course, but in your thoughts. A narrow path winds between worn markers and autumn leaves. There's a hush here, like the land is still listening, still remembering. It's humbling, isn't it, to stand in a place where justice failed so spectacularly, and yet where remembrance now tries to do what the courts could not. Not everyone in Salem forgot. Descendants of the accused and executed have kept their stories alive for centuries. They traced genealogies, pored over court transcripts, stood up in state houses and demanded redress. In a sense, the victims' voices echoed beyond the grave, refusing to be silenced by time. And you hear them too. That's why you're here. There's something else, something softer. Amid all the horror, there were acts of quiet resistance. People who recanted their accusations, judges who later confessed their errors, ministers who stood in pulpits and begged for forgiveness. One minister, Reverend Joseph Green, took over Salem Village after the trials and worked tirelessly to heal his community. He even held reconciliation services where former accusers publicly embraced the families of the accused. Historians still debate how genuine these gestures were. Were they driven by guilt, politics, or sincere remorse? Maybe, all three. Motives can be muddy, but the gesture still mattered. It laid a foundation for healing, and healing, however slow, is part of the legacy too. Today, there are memorials etched with the victims' names, stones that declare what the courts would not, that these people were innocent, that they died, not for crimes, but for being feared. And those memorials aren't just for show. They ask something of you. They ask for reflection, so you reflect. You think about fear, the kind that spreads like wildfire and begs for someone to blame. You think about justice, the kind that needs calm, not chaos, to function. And you think about stories, how we choose to remember the past, how we turn tragedy into caution and caution into compassion, and with that, the journey is done. You've followed the arc of the Salem witch trials from their European roots to their haunting aftermath. You've walked among trembling villagers, sat through twisted courtrooms, and witnessed final gasps beneath the noose. You've seen how power and fear mix into a potent poison, and how long it can take to find the antidote. You've seen how it could happen again, and now, it's time to rest. So let it all fade now. Let the gallows dissolve into mist. Let the panicked cries of 1692 drift away on the wind. Feel the air slow, the story quiet, the tension unspool like a ribbon falling from your hand. Take a breath, deeper this time. You're not in Salem anymore. You're back in your room. The lights are low. Maybe that soft fan is still humming. Maybe the shadows on your wall are just shadows again. Nothing more. Let your muscles melt into the bed, like wax pooling beneath a burned-out candle. Let your thoughts grow long and lazy, stretching out like a cat in the sun. There's no need to hold on to anything now. The story is told. The echoes are stilled. The names have been spoken. There is peace in that. And whatever tomorrow brings, whatever new frights or frenzies the world conjures up, you'll carry with you the quiet certainty that truth, even when buried for centuries, can rise again. That hysteria has a shelf life, that the flicker of doubt can outlast the blaze of fear. So close your eyes. Let the rhythm of your breathing carry you away, slow and sure, like footsteps retreating down a cobbled village lane. You are safe. You are still. And somewhere, in the pages of history, a girl once accused now sleeps too, finally free of chains. Good night. Sweet dreams.